I sent my birthday invites first. 2 weeks later, my brother announced his barbecue party on the same day. Not a single person from my family came to my birthday, not even my wife and daughter. As I cut the cake, my wife texted, "Call me. Urgent." I looked at the message and smiled. 52 missed calls. You know what's funny about planning your own birthday? You start with this ridiculous optimism, like some kind of delusional Hallmark card come to life. There I was, 3 weeks out, scrolling through restaurant websites like I was planning the damn Academy Awards. I had it all mapped out in my head. The perfect evening at Marcello's, this cozy little Italian joint downtown where the breadsticks are warm and the wine doesn't cost more than my mortgage payment. Simple, but meaningful, right? That's what I kept telling myself as I sent out those invites. God, I was such a sucker. I actually spent 45 minutes crafting the perfect text message to my family. Casual enough that they wouldn't think I was desperate, but specific enough that they'd know this mattered to me. Hey everyone, birthday dinner at Marcello's on Saturday the 18th, 7 p.m. Hope to see you there. Complete with that stupid smiley face emoji that I immediately regretted, but was too proud to follow up with a correction. The responses came in like clockwork. Mom, sounds lovely, sweetheart. Dad, looking forward to it, son. My brother Ryan hit me back with a thumbs up emoji, which, in retrospect, should have been my first red flag. When has Ryan ever been that efficient with communication? The guy takes 3 business days to respond to what's up. Julia was in on it from the beginning, obviously. She had to be. We share a damn calendar app. Every doctor's appointment, every parent-teacher conference, every oil change is color-coded and synced between our phones like we're running some kind of suburban corporation. She knew about my birthday dinner the second I booked the reservation. Hell, she probably got the notification before I did. And Sophie, my sweet 16-year-old daughter who suddenly thinks I'm about as cool as a fanny pack at a music festival? Even she seemed genuinely excited. That sounds really nice, Dad, she said, looking up from her phone for approximately 2.3 seconds, which, for Sophie, basically constitutes a standing ovation. So there I was, riding high on this wave of family togetherness, already picturing the Instagram-worthy moment when they'd bring out the cake and everyone would sing that awkward happy birthday song that somehow gets slower and more off-key with every verse. I even had Julia call ahead to make sure they had those little sparkler candles. You know, the ones that make everything look festive but are actually a fire hazard waiting to happen. The week leading up to my birthday, I was like a kid counting down to Christmas. I caught myself humming in the shower, being extra nice to my coworkers, even letting that jackass Henderson cut in line at the coffee shop, because, hey, life was good. My family was going to be there. We were going to laugh, share stories, and for one night, I was going to be the center of attention in the best possible way. Saturday rolled around, and I spent the morning cleaning the house like Martha Stewart was coming for inspection, because after dinner, everyone was going to come back here for cake. Real cake, not some grocery store sheet cake with flowers that look like they were drawn by a colorblind toddler, but actual honest-to-God chocolate cake from that bakery Julia loves. The one where a single cupcake costs more than most people's lunch, but whatever. It was my birthday, and I was feeling generous. By 6 o'clock, I was dressed in my best button-down, the navy one Julia bought me for Christmas that supposedly makes my eyes pop, and checking my watch every 30 seconds like I was expecting the president to show up. The reservation was at 7, which meant we'd all meet there at 7:15 because nobody in my family has ever been on time for anything except their own funerals, and even then I have my doubts. 7:15 came and went. Then 7:30. By 7:45, I was sitting alone at a table for 8, watching the waiter refill my water glass with the kind of pity usually reserved for abandoned puppies. My phone sat on the table like a dead fish, stubbornly silent except for the occasional notification from some app one downloaded and immediately forgot about. That's when my colleagues started showing up. Bless their hearts, they actually remembered. Jim from accounting appeared first, looking slightly confused about why he was the only one there, followed by Sarah from HR with a bottle of wine she probably picked up at the gas station on the way over. Then the Hendersons from next door shuffled in, looking around like they'd walked into the wrong movie theater. "Where is everyone?" Sarah asked, settling into the chair that was supposed to be Mom's. "Running late," I lied, raising my water glass in a mock toast. You know how family is. But I knew. Deep down in that part of your gut, where bad news lives before your brain catches up, I already knew they weren't coming. The silence from my phone wasn't traffic delays or last-minute emergencies. It was abandonment with a smile and a thumbs-up emoji. We ordered appetizers. We made small talk about the weather and the latest office drama. Jim told that story about his son's Little League game for the third time this month. And I laughed in all the right places because that's what you do when you're desperately trying to pretend your heart isn't slowly cracking like old paint on a porch railing. By 8:30, the waiter brought out my cake. Those sparkler candles I was so excited about flickered and danced while my makeshift family of coworkers and neighbors sang happy birthday with the enthusiasm of people attending a mandatory corporate seminar. I smiled and made a wish, probably something pathetic like, "Let this night end soon," and blew out the candles to polite applause. The silence that followed was deafening. Not the comfortable silence of people enjoying each other's company, but the awkward, heavy silence of people who suddenly realize they're witnessing something deeply sad and don't know whether to acknowledge it or pretend everything's fine. That's when my phone finally buzzed. You want to know the exact moment I should have seen this train wreck coming? It was 2 weeks after I sent out those birthday invites, sitting in Mom's kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, watching her fuss over a pot roast like she was performing heart surgery. The whole family was there for one of those mandatory weekly dinners that somehow became a thing after Dad's heart scare last year. Because nothing says, "We care about your health," like forcing everyone to gather around a table loaded with enough carbs to fuel a small aircraft. I was actually feeling pretty good about life. My birthday invites had been out in the universe for 14 whole days, and nobody had bailed yet. Sure, nobody had RSVP'd either, but in my family, silence basically means, yeah, I'll be there, unless someone's actively bleeding or getting divorced. I was leaning back in one of Mom's creaky kitchen chairs, the one she refuses to replace because they have character, which is Mom speak for, "I'm too stubborn to admit these things are older than disco." That's when Ryan waltzed in with that shit-eating grin he's been perfecting since middle school. You know the one. Half smugness, half, "I'm about to ruin your day and enjoy every second of it." He was carrying a 12-pack of Corona like he was bringing frankincense to the manger, and Mom immediately lit up like he'd just announced he was running for Pope. "Ryan, honey, you're just in time. I was telling your father about Mrs. Henderson's new fence situation." But Ryan wasn't listening to Mom's riveting saga about property lines and homeowner association drama. No, sir. Ryan had bigger fish to fry. He cracked open a beer, because apparently 5 o'clock starts at noon on Sundays in Ryan's world, and cleared his throat like he was about to deliver the Gettysburg Address. "Actually, Mom, I've got some news," he announced, taking a theatrical swig of his beer. "I'm throwing a party. Now, in any normal family, this would have been met with mild interest and maybe a request for details. But this is the family where Ryan once got a standing ovation for successfully parallel parking. So naturally, Mom practically fell off her chair with excitement. A party? How wonderful. What's the occasion? And here it comes, folks. The moment my perfectly planned birthday dinner got nuked from orbit. Just a grand barbecue party, Ryan said, grinning wider than the Grand Canyon. Next Saturday, the 18th. Figured it was time to show everyone how it's really done. The 18th, the exact same day as my birthday dinner. The date that had been marked on the family calendar since the moment I sent those invites. The date that everyone, and I mean everyone, knew was my birthday. I felt my stomach drop somewhere around my ankles. "Ryan," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "that's my birthday. We're having dinner at Marcello's, remember?" Ryan looked at me with the kind of innocent confusion that Oscar winners would kill for. "Oh, that's right. Well, it's just a barbecue, man. Lighten up. Lighten up. Lighten up." Like I was some uptight corporate drone getting bent out of shape over a scheduling conflict instead of his older brother who just watched his birthday get steamrolled by a guy who once called me crying because he couldn't figure out how to work his coffee maker. But everyone's already committed to. I started. Committed. Ryan laughed, and it wasn't his usual good-natured chuckle. This was different. Sharper. "Come on, bro. It's not like you're getting married again. It's just dinner. Just dinner. Right. Just the dinner I'd been planning for weeks. Just the one night a year when I'd hoped to be the center of attention for reasons other than fixing someone else's problems or mediating someone else's drama. But here's where it gets really good. Instead of backing down or maybe suggesting a different date, Ryan doubled down like he was playing poker with someone else's money. Besides, he continued, warming up to his theme, I've already put deposits down on everything. The pavilion at Riverside Park, the catering truck, the whole 9 yards. This is going to be epic. Epic. Because apparently, my little brother had decided to turn my birthday into some kind of competition, and he was planning to win by throwing money at it like a drunk lottery winner. Mom, bless her traitorous little heart, was practically vibrating with excitement. Ryan, that sounds absolutely wonderful. How thoughtful of you to plan something so elaborate. Thoughtful. Let me repeat that for the people in the back. Thoughtful. Planning a massive party on your brother's birthday and calling it thoughtful is like setting someone's car on fire and calling it a surprise car wash. I don't know, son. Dad piped up from his recliner, where he'd been pretending to watch golf while obviously listening to every word. Your brother's already got something planned. For a brief, shining moment, I thought Dad was going to stick up for me. Maybe point out that hijacking someone's birthday is generally considered a dick move in most civilized societies. But then Ryan pulled out the big guns. Dad, think about it. When's the last time we had a real family gathering? Something where everyone could just relax, have a few beers, maybe throw a football around? Remember how much fun we used to have at those summer cookouts when we were kids? And just like that, Dad was putty in his hands. Ryan had triggered the magical remember when response that turns grown men into nostalgic marshmallows. Dad's face went all soft and misty-eyed, like he was watching a particularly touching commercial about golden retrievers. Well, Dad said slowly, it would be nice to have everyone together, at Ryan's party, on my birthday, while I sat alone at Marcello's, explaining to the waiter why I needed to cancel 6 of the 8 seats at my reservation. Great, Ryan said, clapping his hands together like he'd just solved world hunger. I'll start making calls. This is going to be the party of the year. Mom was already pulling out her phone, probably to start texting every relative within a 50-mile radius. Should I call Aunt Martha? Oh, and what about the Petersons? They love a good barbecue. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just Ryan being thoughtless or accidentally stepping on my plans. This was strategic. He'd waited exactly 2 weeks after my invites went out, long enough for everyone to know about my dinner, but not long enough for anyone to feel locked in. He'd positioned his party as the fun alternative to my just dinner. He'd even chosen a venue that could accommodate the entire extended family plus half the neighborhood. I was watching a master class in birthday assassination, and my own family was cheering from the sidelines. Julia, who'd been unusually quiet during this whole exchange, finally spoke up. Well, we'll still come to your dinner, she said to me, but even as the words left her mouth, I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. She was already calculating the social cost of missing Ryan's epic barbecue to sit through a quiet dinner with my coworkers. Of course we will, she added, but it sounded like someone agreeing to attend a mandatory workplace sensitivity training. So here's how it all went down on the night that was supposed to be my night. Picture this. Me, sitting at Marcello's in that navy button-down that supposedly makes my eyes pop, surrounded by the warm glow of candlelight that I'd specifically requested because I thought it would make for better photos. You know, the kind of photos that show a man celebrating with the people who matter most to him. Instead, I got the kind of lighting that makes you look like you're attending your own wake. The restaurant was perfect, I'll give it that. Marcello had outdone himself with the ambience. Soft jazz playing just loud enough to fill the conversation gaps. The smell of garlic and basil floating through the air like some kind of aromatic hug, and our table positioned right by the window so we could watch the world go by while we celebrated another year of my existence. Too bad the only people watching the world go by were my coworkers and the Hendersons from next door, who kept glancing at their phones like they were expecting a better invitation to materialize. Jim from accounting was doing his best to keep the mood light, regaling us with stories about his weekend golf game that nobody asked for, but everyone politely endured. So there I was, standing over this impossible putt, and I'm thinking to myself, Jim, this is it. This is your moment of glory. And on he went, while I checked my phone for the 100th time, hoping against hope that maybe Julia had sent some kind of explanation for why my own family had collectively decided to ghost me on my birthday. Sarah from HR had brought that gas station wine I mentioned, and God bless her, she was trying to turn it into something celebratory. "This is actually quite nice," she lied, taking another sip of what was clearly the liquid equivalent of regret. Very bold. The Hendersons were doing that thing older couples do where they communicate entirely through meaningful looks and subtle head tilts. I caught Mrs. Henderson giving her husband the universal "should we ask about the family?" eyebrow raise, and Mr. Henderson responding with the equally universal "absolutely not" head shake. They'd lived next door to us long enough to know that family drama was like quicksand. The more you struggled with it, the deeper you sank. By 8 o'clock, I'd given up pretending that anyone else was coming. The empty chairs around our table weren't fashionably late. They were just empty. Each vacant seat felt like a personal rejection, a physical manifestation of exactly how much I mattered to the people who were supposed to matter most to me. Julia's chair sat there mocking me with its perfectly arranged place setting. Sophie's spot by the window, where she always liked to sit, so she could people watch and pretend she wasn't listening to adult conversation, remained untouched. Even Mom's chair, which I'd positioned at what I thought would be the head of the table, stood as a monument to my own pathetic optimism. The waiter, Giovanni, according to his name tag, had been shooting me sympathetic looks all evening. He was probably in his 20s, with that earnest enthusiasm that only comes from either being new to the service industry or being professionally Italian. Every time he passed our table, I could see him doing the math, counting the empty chairs against the reservation he'd probably written down as "birthday party, table of 8. "Perhaps the others will arrive soon," he'd suggested, hopefully around 7:30, refilling my water glass for the 4th time. "Yeah," I'd replied, "any minute now." But minutes turned into an hour, and hope turned into that familiar sting of disappointment that sits right behind your sternum like heartburn. Except antacids can't fix this particular burn. The conversation at our makeshift table had taken on that forced quality that happens when everyone's trying really hard to pretend everything is normal while the elephant in the room gets bigger and starts doing the Macarena. We'd exhausted Jim's golf stories, Sarah's latest binge-watching recommendations, and the Hendersons' detailed analysis of their neighbors' new landscaping choices. We were officially running on conversational fumes. That's when Giovanni approached with the cake. "Now, let me tell you about this cake." This wasn't just any cake. This was the chocolate masterpiece from Delacroix Bakery that cost more than most people's car payment. 3 layers of dark chocolate heaven with salted caramel filling and enough ganache to make a grown man weep tears of pure joy. I'd ordered it 2 weeks ago, back when I still believed in things like family loyalty and birthday magic. The baker had even written "Happy Birthday" in elegant script across the top, probably assuming it would be surrounded by smiling faces and heartfelt wishes. Instead, it was surrounded by my accountant, my HR rep, and 2 neighbors who were clearly wondering if it would be rude to check the time on their phones. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. Sometimes it gives you a weird kind of clarity. As Giovanni set that beautiful cake down in front of me, complete with those sparkler candles that I'd been so excited about, something shifted inside my chest. Not the crushing weight of disappointment I'd been carrying all evening, but something lighter, something almost liberating. The sparklers caught fire with that satisfying hiss and pop that never gets old, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the people who had bothered to show up. These people, Jim with his terrible golf stories, Sarah with her gas station wine, the Hendersons with their meaningful looks, they were here. Not because they had to be, not because of family obligation or social expectation, but because they'd made the choice to celebrate with me. "Make a wish," Sarah said, raising her glass of questionable wine. And you know what? I did. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and made a wish that surprised even me. I didn't wish for my family to suddenly appear with sheepish apologies and elaborate explanations. I didn't wish for Ryan's barbecue to get rained out or for Julia to have a sudden attack of conscience. I wished for the strength to stop caring so goddamn much. The singing started then, that gloriously awkward rendition of Happy Birthday that somehow gets slower and more off-key every year of your life. But this time, it sounded different. Maybe because the voices singing it actually wanted to be there. Maybe because there was something honest about this ragtag group of people who'd shown up just because they liked me, not because DNA or marriage certificates obligated them to. I blew out the candles to genuine applause, and for about 30 seconds, I felt something that might have been contentment. The cake was as amazing as advertised. The company was surprisingly pleasant, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe this birthday wouldn't be a complete disaster. That's when my phone started buzzing against the table like an angry hornet. The phone was doing that thing where it vibrates so aggressively against the table that it starts walking across the surface like some kind of electronic crab having a seizure. Everyone at the table was staring at it, not because they wanted to be nosy, but because it was impossible to ignore the urgent, panicked buzzing that was cutting through our little birthday bubble like a chainsaw through tissue paper. I picked it up and nearly choked on my bite of $70 chocolate cake. 52 missed calls. 52. All from Julia. Now, let me put this in perspective for you. In the 15 years I've been married to this woman, the most missed calls I've ever had from her was maybe 8. And that was when Sophie broke her arm falling off her bike and needed emergency surgery. 52 missed calls is apocalypse-level communication. This is the kind of phone activity that suggests either the house is on fire, someone's in the hospital, or the zombie apocalypse has finally kicked off and she needs to coordinate our survival strategy. The voicemail notifications were stacked up like pancakes at a Sunday brunch, each little red number taunting me with the urgent desperation of whatever crisis was unfolding in real time while I'd been sitting here eating cake and pretending everything was fine. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, because apparently my face had gone through enough color changes to qualify as a mood ring. "Yeah," I lied, looking at that glowing screen full of digital panic. Just Julia. As if those two words could possibly explain the magnitude of whatever shitstorm was brewing on the other end of those 52 unanswered calls. As if I could casually dismiss the fact that my wife, who was supposed to be at my birthday dinner right now, was apparently having some kind of communication meltdown while attending my brother's rival party. The phone buzzed again. Call 53. I stared at that incoming call, Julia's smiling face filling the screen with a photo from our anniversary dinner last year. Back when she still looked at me like I was someone worth celebrating instead of someone whose birthday you could blow off for better barbecue. Her contact name glowed at the top, Julia Red Heart, with that little heart emoji I'd added back when we were still in the phase of our marriage where we put hearts after each other's names instead of just grimly accepting each other's existence. Everyone was watching me now, not obviously. They were all pretending to be fascinated by their cake or the flickering candle wax, but I could feel their collective attention like heat from a campfire. The weight of expectation, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Are you going to answer it? Here's what I should have done. Any reasonable person would have answered that phone, probably stepped outside to take the call, and found out what earth-shattering emergency required 53 attempts at contact. Any decent husband would have been concerned, maybe even frightened, about what could possibly be so urgent that it required this level of communication assault. But you know what? I wasn't feeling particularly reasonable, or decent, or husband-like. Instead, I looked at that buzzing phone, at Julia's smiling face mocking me from the screen, and I did something that surprised everyone at the table, including myself. I smiled. Not a fake smile, not one of those tight-lipped, socially acceptable expressions you paste on when you're pretending everything's fine. This was something else entirely. This was the kind of smile that comes from deep in your chest, the kind that starts as a tiny spark of recognition and spreads across your face like sunrise breaking over a mountain range. I was smiling because I finally got it. The cosmic joke of it all, the beautiful, terrible irony that was my life. Here I was, sitting at my own birthday dinner, surrounded by people who had actually chosen to be here, and my wife, who had chosen to be somewhere else entirely, was now desperately trying to drag me into whatever drama was unfolding at the party she'd chosen over me. The phone stopped buzzing. Julia's face disappeared from the screen, replaced by the notification that I now had 53 missed calls and what looked like roughly the same number of voicemails. My phone's battery was probably crying from the workout it had just received. "You're not going to answer?" Jim asked, because Jim has never met a boundary he couldn't accidentally cross with his well-meaning concern. "Nope," I said, cutting another piece of cake. This bite tasted even better than the first one, maybe because it came with a side of liberation. It's my birthday. And that was it. That was the moment everything changed, right there between the chocolate ganache and the flickering candlelight. Not with some dramatic declaration or a table-flipping tantrum, but with a simple smile and a piece of cake. The Hendersons exchanged one of their meaningful looks. This one clearly falling into the well, that's interesting category. Sarah raised her glass of questionable wine in what might have been approval or confusion. It was hard to tell. Giovanni appeared at my elbow with a fresh napkin, probably thinking I'd lost my mind entirely. But I hadn't lost my mind. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I'd found it. The phone stayed silent for exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, long enough for me to finish my cake and start on a second piece, because why the hell not? Then it started buzzing again. Call 54. This time, I didn't even look at the screen. I just smiled wider and took another bite of cake, savoring the salted caramel filling while my phone vibrated itself into electronic exhaustion on the table. Around me, the conversation gradually resumed, my dinner companions apparently deciding that ignoring ringing phones was a perfectly normal birthday tradition. Call 55. Call 56. Each buzz felt like a tiny victory, proof that whatever chaos was unfolding at Ryan's grand barbecue spectacular, it wasn't my problem. Not tonight. Tonight, I was exactly where I was supposed to be, eating overpriced cake with people who had shown up because they wanted to, not because they had to. By the time we reached call 60, even Jim had stopped glancing nervously at my phone. Sarah was telling a surprisingly funny story about her cat's ongoing war with the mailman, and the Hendersons were debating whether to order dessert. Apparently, my chocolate cake had inspired them to embrace the sweet life. I was laughing, actually laughing, at Sarah's cat story when the buzzing finally stopped. My phone screen went dark, and the silence that followed felt rich and full instead of empty and abandoned. This was what peace sounded like. Not the absence of noise, but the absence of obligation to answer every demand for my attention. That's when I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. I wasn't the forgotten one tonight. I wasn't the one sitting alone, desperate and abandoned. I was the one who had walked away. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was smiling because I wanted to. You know what's beautiful about modern technology? It lets you experience betrayal in high definition, with crystal clear audio and timestamps that tell you exactly when your life went to hell. I discovered this particular joy the next morning, sitting in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that tasted like bitter truth, scrolling through Julia's voicemails like some kind of masochistic archaeologist digging through the ruins of my marriage. The first few messages were what you'd expect from a wife who'd abandoned her husband's birthday dinner. Standard damage control stuff, delivered with that fake cheerful tone that women perfect around the same time they learn to walk in heels without falling on their faces. Hey honey, sorry I missed your call earlier. Ryan's party is going great. Everyone's asking about you. Call me back when you get this. Okay? Love you. Love you. Sure, Julia. Nothing says, I love you, like ditching your spouse's birthday for better brisket and potato salad. But that was just the appetizer. The real feast of dysfunction was still coming. Message number 4 was where things started getting interesting. The fake cheer was beginning to crack around the edges, like cheap paint in a Florida summer. Okay, so listen, we have a tiny situation here. The catering truck broke down about an hour ago, and apparently they can't get another one until tomorrow. People are starting to get hungry, and Ryan's kind of freaking out. Can you maybe call that guy you know who runs the food truck downtown? The one with the tacos? Just call me back, okay? The one with the tacos. She meant Miguel, who runs Wheels of Steel Taco Company and happens to be one of my clients. A guy I'd helped secure a small business administration loan last year when his original truck got totaled by a drunk driver. A guy who trusted me, who counted on me, who probably would have moved heaven and earth to help me out if I'd asked. But I wasn't the one asking, was I? Message 7 was where Julia's desperation really started to shine through. The fake cheer had been completely abandoned in favor of what I like to call crisis management mode. That special blend of panic and entitlement that emerges when someone realizes their poorly planned party is about to become a social disaster. Listen, I know you're probably still at dinner, but this is getting bad. Really bad. Ryan spent all his money on the venue and the decorations, and now we have about 60 people here with no food. Your mom is asking where you are, and I don't know what to tell her. Can you please just call Miguel and see if he can come out here? I'll explain everything later, I promise. I'll explain everything later. That's relationship code for, I'm going to gaslight you into believing this is somehow your fault, but right now I need you to fix my problems. The beautiful thing about listening to someone's descent into panic in real time is that you can actually hear the moment when their true priorities reveal themselves. For Julia, that moment came around message 12, when the polite requests transformed into something closer to demands. Okay, I've been calling you for 2 hours now, and this is getting ridiculous. I get that you're upset about tonight, but Ryan really needs your help. Everyone is looking at me like I should be able to fix this, and I told them you would know what to do. You always know what to do. So please, just pick up the goddamn phone and call Miguel. You always know what to do. Translation: you're really useful when we need something fixed, cleaned up, or paid for. The rest of the time, you're basically furniture that occasionally needs feeding. But wait, it gets better. Message 18 was where Julia completely dropped the pretense of this being about family emergency and revealed what this was really about: social embarrassment. Her voice had that particular quality that happens when someone realizes they're about to become the subject of neighborhood gossip, and not the good kind. The Hendersons just left. The Hendersons. They said they had to get home, but I saw them talking to the Johnsons before they went, and now the Johnsons are looking at their phones and making excuses too. People are starting to leave, and Ryan is just standing there like a deer in headlights. Mom keeps asking why you're not here to help, and I don't know what to say anymore. Please just call me back. Ah, there it is. The truth, finally. This wasn't about emergency or family crisis. This was about Julia realizing that she'd hitched her wagon to the wrong horse, and now she was watching her social status circle the drain in real time. She'd chosen Ryan's party over my birthday, and now Ryan's party was falling apart like a cheap umbrella in a hurricane. The desperation really ramped up around message 25, when Julia's voice took on that edge that happens when someone's trying not to cry, but also trying not to scream. I don't understand why you're not answering. This isn't like you. You always answer when I call. Always. Something must be wrong with your phone, right? Because you wouldn't just ignore me. Not when we need you like this. Ryan's talking about canceling the whole thing, and if he does, everyone's going to know this was a disaster. Everyone's going to know we couldn't even throw a simple barbecue without everything falling apart. We couldn't throw a simple barbecue. Because apparently, even when I wasn't invited to the planning meeting, I was still somehow responsible for the execution. Even when they collectively decided my birthday wasn't worth showing up for, I was still expected to be on standby for damage control. By message 30, Julia had moved past desperation and straight into that territory where panic meets rage and produces something truly spectacular. You know what? Fine. Don't answer. But when your daughter asks why her father couldn't be bothered to help save her uncle's party, I'll tell her the truth. I'll tell her that you were too petty and childish to put aside your hurt feelings for one night. I'll tell her that when your family needed you, you decided to punish everyone by disappearing. My daughter. She was bringing Sophie into this now, weaponizing my relationship with my kid to guilt me into cleaning up their mess. Because nothing says family values like using your teenager as emotional blackmail. But the real masterpiece came in message 47, where Julia's voice cracked just enough to let me know she was either crying or doing a damn good impression of it. I don't know what else to say. I don't know how to fix this. Everyone keeps looking at me like I should have answers, like I should know where you are and why you're not helping. Your brother is about to have a complete meltdown. Your parents are asking if something happened to you. And I'm standing here feeling like the worst wife in the world because I can't even get my own husband to answer his phone. The worst wife in the world. Finally, something we could agree on. After listening to Julia's 47-message symphony of desperation, I did what any reasonable person would do. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon, sat my ass down in my favorite chair, the one Julia always complains makes the living room look uncoordinated, but is comfortable enough to die in, and took a long, hard look at the pattern that had been playing out right under my nose for years. See, here's the thing about being the reliable one in the family. You become invisible in the most spectacular way possible. You're simultaneously the most important person in the room and the least interesting. You're the guy everyone calls when the shit hits the fan, but nobody thinks to invite when they're planning something fun. You're basically a human Swiss Army knife. Incredibly useful, completely taken for granted, and stored in a junk drawer until needed. Ryan, on the other hand, has been the golden boy since he learned to walk. And I mean literally since he learned to walk. The kid took his first steps at 9 months old, And you would have thought he'd just cured cancer based on the way mom and dad carried on. Me? I'd been walking for 2 years at that point, but apparently that wasn't newsworthy anymore. First kids break ground. Second kids just follow the path that's already been paved. That pattern has been playing out ever since. When Ryan graduated high school by the skin of his teeth, and I mean barely, the kid had to take summer school just to get his diploma. Mom threw him a party that would have made a lottery winner jealous. When I graduated valedictorian 3 years earlier, we went to Applebee's. Fucking Applebee's. Because apparently academic excellence deserves the same celebration as a Tuesday night dinner special. College was more of the same. Ryan dropped out after 2 semesters, claiming he needed to find himself, which apparently required a 6-month backpacking trip through Europe that Dad happily funded. When he came back with nothing but a questionable tattoo and an even more questionable accent, everyone acted like he'd returned from some noble vision quest instead of what it actually was, an expensive quarter-life crisis funded by parental enablement. Meanwhile, I was grinding through 4 years of business school, working 2 part-time jobs to pay for textbooks and ramen noodles, making Dean's List every semester while Ryan was finding himself in Amsterdam coffee shops. Did anyone throw me a party when I graduated magna cum laude? Take a wild guess. Mom made a nice dinner, Dad gave me a firm handshake, and Ryan was too hungover from his welcome home celebration to even show up. The business failures were the real kicker, though. Ryan has started exactly 3 businesses in his adult life, and all 3 have crashed and burned like the Hindenburg having a bad day. First was the food truck venture. Yeah, the irony of Julia wanting me to call Miguel wasn't lost on me, which lasted exactly 6 months before Ryan discovered that running a business requires things like getting up early and keeping track of money and actually showing up consistently. When that folded, who do you think Dad called to help clean up the financial mess? If you guessed the son who actually knows how to balance a checkbook, you'd be right. I spent 3 weekends going through Ryan's disaster of a filing system, trying to sort out vendor payments and tax obligations while Ryan nursed his wounded ego at various happy hours around town. Business number 2 was even better, a landscaping company that Ryan started with his buddy Jake from high school. These 2 geniuses managed to kill more grass than they planted, showed up to jobs with equipment that barely functioned, and somehow convinced themselves they could run a business based entirely on good vibes and working when we feel like it. Spoiler alert, the market wasn't particularly interested in their feelings. When that venture inevitably imploded, guess who got the panicked phone call about small claims court and angry customers? Guess who spent his own money on a lawyer to keep Ryan from getting sued into oblivion? Guess who never got paid back for that lawyer, despite repeated promises that the money was definitely coming next month? And the third business? Jesus Christ, the third business was a masterpiece of delusion. Ryan decided he was going to be a social media influencer. Not for any particular skill or talent, mind you, but because he'd seen some 22-year-old making bank by posting videos of himself eating cereal. Ryan spent $2 grand of mom and dad's money on camera equipment and ring lights, set up what he called his content studio in their basement, and proceeded to create exactly 17 videos that collectively garnered about as much attention as a mime at a death metal concert. But here's what really gets me. Through all of this, through every failed venture and harebrained scheme, Mom and Dad never stopped believing in Ryan's potential. Every failure was just a learning experience. Every disaster was proof that he was gaining valuable life skills. Meanwhile, I was building a successful financial planning practice, buying my first house, getting married, having a kid. You know, boring adult stuff that doesn't come with participation trophies. And Julia? Don't even get me started on Julia. When we first started dating, she seemed impressed by my stability, my ambition, my ability to plan more than 5 minutes into the future. She used to joke that I was the adult in her life, the guy who could handle the boring but important stuff while she figured out what she wanted to do with her career. But somewhere along the way, stable became boring, and responsible became predictable. Ryan's chaos started looking like adventure. His spontaneity became charming instead of irresponsible. His complete inability to plan ahead transformed from a character flaw into a refreshing approach to life. I watched it happen in real time over the years. Family gatherings where Julia would light up when Ryan walked in, laughing at his stories about whatever ridiculous situation he'd gotten himself into lately. She'd hang on every word of his latest get-rich-quick scheme while I sat there like a piece of furniture, occasionally offering practical advice that nobody wanted to hear. Sophie fell under his spell too, because of course she did. Uncle Ryan was the fun one, the one who showed up with inappropriate gifts and taught her things I'd specifically asked him not to teach her. Uncle Ryan didn't lecture her about homework or responsibility or thinking about her future. Uncle Ryan just wanted to have a good time, and what 16-year-old doesn't want to be around that energy? So here I was, sitting in my uncoordinated chair, sipping bourbon that cost more than Ryan's last business plan was worth, finally seeing the whole picture with painful clarity. I wasn't the overlooked son, the underappreciated husband, the boring father. I was the foundation they all built their lives on, the stable ground they took for granted while they reached for more exciting things. And they just spent my birthday proving exactly how little that foundation meant to them when push came to shove. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, they're right. But what they don't tell you is that the best revenge starts with proper documentation. And brother, did I have documentation? After sitting in that chair for 3 hours, nursing bourbon and clarity in equal measure, I did what any self-respecting financial planner would do. I got organized. First stop was my phone. Those 52 missed calls weren't just evidence of Julia's panic. They were timestamps of betrayal, a digital paper trail showing exactly when my family's priorities became crystal clear. But the real treasure was in those voicemails. 47 separate audio files of Julia's voice getting progressively more desperate, each one a perfect little capsule of how quickly family loyalty turns into fix my problems when the chips are down. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, playing each message back and taking notes like I was preparing for the world's most depressing deposition. Message 12. Julia admits she told everyone I would know what to do about their catering disaster. Message 18. She reveals that people are leaving Ryan's party and it's becoming a social embarrassment. Message 25. The first time she tries to guilt me using Sophie. But here's the beautiful thing about people in crisis. They tell the truth. When Julia was panicking about their failed party, she wasn't thinking about how her words might sound later. She was just being honest about what she really thought of me. The reliable fix-it guy who should drop everything to save their asses, even after they'd collectively decided my birthday wasn't worth showing up for. I saved every single voicemail to my computer, backed them up to the cloud, and created a folder on my desktop labeled for later. Because if there's one thing 20 years in financial planning has taught me, it's that documentation is everything. People can lie about what they said, what they meant, what they intended, but digital files don't have selective memory. Next, I dove into the social media rabbit hole, because if you really want to understand how people feel about you, watch what they post when they think you're not paying attention. Facebook was a goldmine of hypocrisy. Julia's page was littered with photos from Ryan's epic barbecue, all posted in real time while I was sitting alone at Marcello's. The timestamps were perfect. 7:23 p.m., Julia posting a selfie with Ryan, both of them grinning like idiots with the caption, "Family fun time." Right around the time she should have been sitting across from me at dinner. 7:45 p.m., a group shot of everyone at the party, including Mom, Dad, and Sophie, all looking like they were having the time of their lives. Posted exactly when she would have been listening to Giovanni sing happy birthday to me and my makeshift family of coworkers. But the real kicker was the 8:30 p.m. post. A picture of the empty catering tables with the caption, "When your food truck breaks down, but family comes first." Red heart hashtag BBQ fail hashtag family time. Posted literally minutes before she started that panicked calling spree, trying to drag me into their mess. Family comes first. I screenshot that one about 6 times, because the irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Sophie's Instagram was even better, because teenagers have zero filter and even less awareness of consequences. Her story from that night was a chronological breakdown of my family's betrayal, told in the casual, thoughtless way that only a 16-year-old can manage. First post. Uncle Ryan's party is gonna be lit. Fire, 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 with a picture of the party setup. Posted at 6:15 p.m., 45 minutes before my birthday dinner was supposed to start. Second post. Why is the food truck broken though? Loudly crying face at 7:52 p.m. with a picture of the sad, empty serving tables. Third post, mom's freaking out about dad LOL at 8:35 p.m. No picture, just text, but the timing lined up perfectly with Julia's voicemail meltdown. The beauty of Instagram stories is that they disappear after 24 hours unless you save them. So I saved them. Every single one, screenshot and filed away in my growing collection of digital evidence. But the crown jewel of my documentation came from an unexpected source, mom's Facebook page. See, mom might be technologically challenged enough to accidentally post photos of her thumb on a regular basis, but she's also the family historian. Every gathering, every celebration, every moment she thinks deserves preserving gets posted with the kind of detailed captions that would make a museum curator proud. And there it was, posted at 9:15 p.m. on the night of my birthday. A long, rambling post about Ryan's wonderful barbecue party that included this particularly damning paragraph. So proud of my Ryan for organizing such a lovely gathering. Even though we had some food troubles, truck broke down, everyone pulled together to make it special. Sometimes the best memories come from the unexpected moments. Wish our other son could have been here to help out, but I'm sure he had his reasons. Family is everything. Red heart. Wish our other son could have been here to help out. Not, wish he could have been here to celebrate with us. Or, hope he's having a nice birthday. No, she wished I could have been there to help out. To fix their problems. To be useful. And the kicker? I'm sure he had his reasons. Like choosing to attend my own birthday dinner was some kind of petty rebellion instead of, the normal thing a person does on their birthday. I screenshot that post, too, along with all 37 comments from relatives and family friends expressing sympathy for Ryan's tough night and praising his positive attitude in the face of adversity. Not one single comment asking where I was or wishing me happy birthday. Not one person in my extended family even mentioning that it was my birthday. But wait, it gets better. Because Dad, bless his oblivious heart, had left his own comment on Mom's post. Ryan handled it like a champ. Proud of both my boys, even if one couldn't make it tonight. Maybe next time he'll prioritize family over whatever else he had going on. Maybe next time he'll prioritize family. I was prioritizing family, my actual birthday, the one they'd all known about for months. But apparently, my birthday wasn't family enough compared to Ryan's impromptu barbecue disaster. I saved that one too, right next to the voicemails and Instagram stories and Facebook photos. Every piece of evidence carefully filed away, time-stamped and cross-referenced like I was building a legal case. Because maybe I was. The final piece of my documentation came from an unexpected source, my credit card statements. See, I'd paid for that birthday dinner at Marcello's, obviously, but I'd also picked up the tab for my colleagues and the Hendersons. 47 people had been invited to celebrate with me that night, but only 5 had shown up, and I'd ended up buying dinner for everyone because that's what you do when you're the responsible one. $347 for a birthday dinner that my own family couldn't be bothered to attend. I printed out that receipt and added it to my folder, not because I expected anyone to reimburse me, but because it was tangible proof of exactly how much my birthday had been worth to them. I sat back and looked at my laptop screen, at the folder labeled for later that now contained months of screenshots, hours of audio recordings, printed receipts, and social media posts that painted a crystal clear picture of exactly how my family really felt about me. I didn't know exactly how I was going to use this evidence yet, but I knew one thing for certain. When the time came, I'd be ready. Here's the thing about living with people who've fundamentally written you off. They get really fucking comfortable with their disrespect. It's like they've collectively decided that you're too nice, too stable, too goddamn reliable to ever call them on their bullshit. So they just keep piling it on until you're basically a human doormat with a mortgage and a 401k. The weeks after my birthday were a masterclass in gaslighting disguised as normal family life. Julia slipped back into our routine like nothing had happened, making coffee in the mornings and asking about my day like she hadn't spent my birthday frantically trying to drag me into cleaning up someone else's mess. She'd kiss my cheek when she left for work, text me about picking up groceries on the way home, and curl up next to me in bed at night like we were still the same couple we'd been before she'd chosen barbecue over birthday cake. The really impressive part was how she managed to never actually acknowledge what had happened. Not once did she apologize for missing my dinner. Not once did she explain why Ryan's last-minute party had suddenly become more important than the celebration we'd been planning for weeks. She just acted like it hadn't happened. Like my birthday was some minor scheduling conflict that we'd all moved past instead of a fundamental betrayal that had shown me exactly where I ranked in her list of priorities. Sophie was even more impressive in her ability to pretend everything was normal. She'd bounce into the kitchen in the mornings, grab her usual breakfast of whatever sugary cereal was currently fashionable, and chat about school drama or friend gossip like she hadn't spent my birthday posting Instagram stories about how much fun Uncle Ryan's party was. The girl could look me straight in the eye and ask me to drive her to the mall, apparently seeing no irony in asking favors from the father she ditched for better entertainment. But the real artists were my parents. Mom called me 3 days after my birthday. Not to apologize, mind you, but to tell me all about Ryan's wonderful party and how sorry she was that the food situation had been such a disaster. She spent 20 minutes detailing every moment of Ryan's barbecue catastrophe, like she was giving me a play-by-play of the Super Bowl, apparently oblivious to the fact that she was describing the event she'd chosen over her own son's birthday celebration. "Your brother handled it so well," she gushed, her voice full of that maternal pride that I hadn't heard directed at me since. Well, I couldn't remember when. Even when everything went wrong, he kept everyone's spirits up. You would have been proud of him. You would have been proud of him. Not, "We missed you," or "We're sorry we couldn't make your dinner." No, she wanted me to be proud of Ryan for gracefully handling the disaster that had ruined the party they'd all chosen over me. Dad was even more direct in his revisionist history when I saw him the following weekend. Because apparently I was still expected to show up for family obligations despite being persona non grata when it came to actual celebrations, he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Sorry we missed your dinner, son. But you understand how it is when family needs you." Family needs you. Like Ryan's poorly planned barbecue was somehow more family than his older brother's birthday. Like showing up for me would have been nice, but optional, while rescuing Ryan from his own incompetence was a sacred duty that superseded all other obligations. The beautiful thing was how seamlessly they'd all coordinated this narrative without apparently discussing it. Ryan was the victim of unfortunate circumstances who'd handled adversity with grace. They were the loyal family members who'd rallied around him in his time of need. And I was what? The understanding brother who'd naturally stepped aside so they could focus on the real crisis? But here's what they didn't count on. I was done being understanding. I started small, because the best revenge is always subtle revenge. When Julia asked me to pick up dry cleaning, I forgot. When Sophie needed a ride to her friend's house, I was suddenly too busy with work. When Mom called asking if I could help Dad fix his computer, I developed a mysterious inability to find time in my schedule. "You've been so distant lately," Julia said one night, sitting on the edge of our bed while I read a book that was infinitely more interesting than whatever conversation she wanted to have. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said, not looking up from my pages. "Just busy with work." Work became my excuse for everything. Work was why I couldn't attend Ryan's next gathering. Work was why I missed Dad's birthday dinner. Oh, the irony was delicious. Work was why I was suddenly unavailable for all those little favors and fixes that had somehow become my full-time, unpaid job. The thing is, work actually was keeping me busy, but not in the way they thought. I'd started taking on bigger clients, more complex cases, building relationships with people who actually valued what I brought to the table. My practice was growing, my income was increasing, and for the first time in years, I was being appreciated by people who mattered. I landed the Morrison account in June, a tech executive looking to restructure his entire financial portfolio after a successful IPO. The kind of high-stakes, high-reward client that most financial planners dream about. The kind of deal that required late nights, weekend meetings, and the sort of attention to detail that had always made me good at my job, but apparently boring at parties. When I told Julia about the Morrison deal, about how it was going to significantly increase our household income and set us up for early retirement, she nodded absently and said, "That's nice, honey. Hey, Ryan's thinking about starting another business. Maybe you could help him with the financial planning." Maybe you could help him with the financial planning. I'd just landed the biggest client of my career, potentially changing our entire financial future, and her response was to suggest I donate my expertise to her brother-in-law's next inevitable failure. That's when I realized something that should have been obvious years earlier. They didn't see me as successful. They saw me as useful. My achievements weren't accomplishments to be celebrated. They were resources to be shared with people who mattered more. The Morrison account led to the Pritchard account, which led to the whole Westfield development portfolio. By August, I was handling more money than I'd ever imagined, working with people who treated me like the expert I'd always been but had never been acknowledged as. My calendar was packed with meetings, consultations, and strategy sessions with clients who hung on my every word because they understood that my advice could make or break their financial futures. And my family, they barely noticed. Julia complained that I was working too much. Sophie rolled her eyes when I couldn't drive her somewhere because I had a client call. Mom asked when I was going to take a break from all that business stuff and spend some quality time with the family. Quality time with the family. The same family that had collectively decided my birthday wasn't worth attending. The same people who saw my success as an inconvenience that kept me from being available for their convenience. That's when I started planning Ryan's next lesson in consequences. There's something absolutely poetic about watching someone dig their own grave with a party planning shovel. Ryan's family barbecue too. 0-inch announcement came in early July, delivered with all the fanfare of someone who'd learned absolutely nothing from his previous disaster. This time, he was going big, and I mean Vegas wedding chapel Elvis impersonator big. The family group text lit up like Times Square on New Year's Eve when Ryan shared his grand vision. Lake Harmony Lodge, one of those rustic chic venues that cost more per day than most people's monthly mortgage payments. Professional catering, a live band, activities for the kids, and enough alcohol to float a small yacht. The biggest family party of the year, he proclaimed, complete with enough exclamation points to power a small city. This is going to be amazing. Julia texted back, because apparently caps lock is the appropriate response to financial irresponsibility disguised as family bonding. Can't wait. Sophie chimed in, probably already planning her Instagram story strategy. So proud of my boy for bringing the family together. Mom added, because watching your adult son throw money he doesn't have at a party he can't afford is apparently grounds for maternal pride in the Johnson family handbook. I sat in my office, looking at this digital circle jerk of enthusiasm on my phone screen, and felt something that was part amusement, part anticipation, and part the cold satisfaction that comes from watching your enemies line up their own dominoes for you to knock down. Because here's what they didn't know. I'd been busy. Really busy. While they were all pretending my birthday betrayal had never happened, I'd been building something beautiful. A network of contacts, clients, and professional relationships that extended far beyond my little corner of the financial planning world. Miguel from Wheels of Steel Taco Company? Yeah, we'd stayed in touch. Turns out, helping a guy save his business creates the kind of loyalty that money can't buy. And Miguel had friends, other food truck operators, catering companies, event planners. People who talk to each other, who share information, who remember favors. The Morrison account had connected me with tech executives who knew marketing directors, who worked with social media managers, who understood exactly how information flows in the digital age. The Pritchard deal had introduced me to lawyers who knew journalists who understood the art of strategic communication. And the Westfield development portfolio? Well, that had given me access to the kind of people who could make or break someone's reputation with a few well-placed phone calls. Ryan had scheduled his epic family gathering for Saturday, August 15th, a full year and 3 weeks after he'd hijacked my birthday. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd spent an entire year basking in the glory of his first party disaster, retelling the story of how he'd pulled everyone together and made the best of a bad situation, turning his colossal failure into some kind of heroic family legend. But this time was going to be different. This time I was ready. I started my campaign on Monday morning, exactly 5 days before Ryan's big event. Not with some dramatic confrontation or angry outburst. That's amateur hour stuff. No, I started with a simple email to my network. Professional, calm, matter of fact. The subject line read, sharing some context on family dynamics. The body was a masterpiece of understated devastation. I didn't rant or rave or sound bitter. I simply shared the facts, supported by all that beautiful documentation I'd been collecting. Screenshots of Julia's social media posts from my birthday, timestamped to show exactly when she'd been having fun at Ryan's party instead of attending my dinner. Audio files of her voicemails, demonstrating the panic and desperation when Ryan's first party fell apart and they needed me to fix it. But the real kicker was Mom's Facebook post, the one where she'd wished I could have been there to help out, instead of celebrating my own birthday. I'd annotated it like a legal document, highlighting the key phrases that revealed exactly how my family saw me, not as someone to celebrate, but as someone to use. I sent this package to select people in my professional and personal network. Not everyone. That would have been overkill. Just the right people. Clients who'd become friends. Colleagues who knew me well enough to understand the context. Neighbors who'd been at my birthday dinner and had seen the empty chairs with their own eyes. The beautiful thing about truth is that it spreads itself. You don't need to push it or promote it or convince people to believe it. You just need to present it clearly, and people draw their own conclusions. By Wednesday, the ripple effects were starting. The Hendersons mentioned to the Petersons how they'd witnessed my family's no-show at my birthday. The Petersons told the Johnsons, who told the Millers, who happened to know several people who'd been invited to Ryan's big lakeside extravaganza. Miguel, bless his entrepreneurial heart, shared the story with his network of food service providers, not out of malice, but out of genuine disbelief that anyone would treat family that way. Word spread through the catering community like wildfire. The Johnson family were the kind of people who'd abandon their own son's birthday celebration, then panic call him to fix their problems when their own event fell apart. By Thursday, my story had reached the social media managers and marketing directors in my professional network. These people understood narrative, understood how perception shapes reality in the digital age. They didn't do anything dramatic. They just shared the story with their own networks, framing it as an example of how some families prioritize image over substance. But the masterstroke came Friday morning, 18 hours before Ryan's party was scheduled to begin. I'd saved the best for last, a carefully curated package of evidence sent to every single person who'd been invited to Ryan's lakeside celebration. Not just my family's evidence, but context. Screenshots showing the timeline of events from my birthday. Audio clips of Julia's increasingly desperate voicemails. Social media posts proving that they'd all chosen Ryan's first party over my birthday, then expected me to bail them out when it failed. The message was simple. Thought you should know what kind of people you're celebrating with this weekend. I sent it at 8:47 a.m. on Friday, just as people were checking their phones with their morning coffee, planning their weekend, getting excited about Ryan's big party. Then I sat back and waited for the consequences to unfold. You know what they say about history repeating itself? Sometimes it doesn't just repeat. Sometimes it comes back with interest, compound annually, and delivers a return on investment that would make Warren Buffett weep with joy. By 3 p.m. on Saturday afternoon, exactly 24 hours after I'd sent my truth bombs into the digital stratosphere, my phone started buzzing with the familiar rhythm of panic that I'd heard once before, almost exactly 1 year ago. Except this time, I was ready for it. This time, I was sitting in my backyard with a cold beer, my laptop open to the folder labeled Mission Accomplished, watching the beautiful chaos unfold in real time through social media notifications and increasingly frantic family communications. The first sign that my plan was working came from an unexpected source, the Lake Harmony Lodge's Instagram account. They'd posted a cheerful, "Welcome to the Johnson family celebration" message at noon, complete with photos of their beautifully decorated pavilion and professionally arranged buffet tables. By 2:30 p.m., they'd quietly deleted the post. By 3:15 p.m., they'd posted a generic, "Beautiful Saturday at the Lodge" message with no mention of any specific event. That's when my phone started its familiar dance of desperation. Julia, call number 1. I watched her name light up the screen, that same smiling photo from our anniversary dinner, and took a long, satisfying sip of my beer. Ryan, call number 2. Then 3. Then 4. Mom, calls 5 through 8. Because apparently panic makes her forget that leaving 4 voicemails in a row isn't actually more effective than leaving 1. The beautiful thing about being prepared for chaos is that you can actually enjoy it. I'd learned my lesson from last year's birthday disaster. This time, I wasn't going to sit there wondering what was happening. This time, I had front row seats to the whole spectacular collapse, courtesy of the digital age and my carefully cultivated network of information sources. Miguel texted me at 3:22 p.m. Dude, what the hell happened to your brother's party? Just got a call canceling the backup catering I wasn't even officially hired for. Something about changed circumstances? Sarah from my office, remember Sarah with the gas station wine, sent me a screenshot at 3:35 p.m. Someone in her neighborhood Facebook group had posted asking if anyone knew the real story about the Johnson family drama, because apparently the gossip had reached suburban social media faster than a wildfire in drought season. But the real entertainment came from watching Ryan's social media accounts. The man had been posting updates about his epic family gathering all week, building anticipation like he was promoting a major concert. Photos of the venue scouting, videos of him explaining his vision for the perfect family celebration, countdown posts with inspirational quotes about the importance of bringing people together. At 3:47 p.m., he posted a single line. Due to unforeseen circumstances, today's event has been postponed. Thanks for understanding. Unforeseen circumstances, like the consequences of your own actions, are some kind of natural disaster that nobody could have predicted. The comments on that post were a masterclass in social media schadenfreude. People asking what happened, expressing concern, offering help, but also, increasingly, people who'd clearly heard the real story and were asking pointed questions about family loyalty and priorities. Hope everything's okay. Though I heard there was some drama about birthdays, posted someone named Jennifer who I didn't recognize, but who apparently had excellent sources. Unforeseen or just consequences. Posted Dave Patterson, one of my clients who'd obviously received my Friday morning information package and decided he had some thoughts to share. My phone had reached 37 missed calls by 4 p.m., distributed across all the usual suspects. Julia was leading the pack with 14 attempts, followed by Ryan with 11, Mom with 8, and even Dad with 4, which was remarkable, considering Dad usually communicates exclusively through grunts and disappointed looks. That's when Sophie finally joined the party. Call number 38 came from my daughter, and for just a moment, I felt a tiny pang of something that might have been guilt. Sophie was 16, caught in the middle of adult dysfunction, probably confused and embarrassed by whatever social media nightmare was unfolding around her friends. But then I remembered her Instagram story from my birthday. Uncle Ryan's party is gonna be lit. Fire, 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 posted while I was sitting alone at Marcelo's, waiting for family that never showed. Call 38 went unanswered, just like the 37 before it. The voicemails started piling up like snow in a blizzard, each one a little more desperate, a little more revealing than the last. I didn't listen to them immediately. Part of the joy was letting them accumulate, letting the panic build to a crescendo before I finally tuned in to hear what they had to say. But Julia's texts were immediate and increasingly frantic. Call me right now. Whatever you think you're doing, stop. People are leaving, everyone's asking questions. What did you do? This is our family you're destroying. Our family. Our family. The same family that had collectively decided my birthday wasn't worth showing up for, but now suddenly belonged to both of us when it was falling apart. By 5 p.m., my phone showed 51 missed calls, and I decided it was time for the grand finale. I poured myself another beer, opened my laptop, and started listening to the voicemails in chronological order, like a connoisseur sampling a fine wine that had been aging to perfection. Julia's first message was all fake calm and damage control. Hey honey, there's been some kind of misunderstanding about Ryan's party. Can you call me back so we can clear this up? Some people are saying they received some kind of email, and I'm sure it's all just a big mix-up. A big mix-up, like accidentally sending documented evidence of their betrayal with some kind of technical glitch instead of a deliberate choice. Ryan's messages were more direct. What the fuck, man? What the fuck did you do? People are canceling. The caterer wants to know if we're still having the party, and Mom's crying. Call me back. Mom's crying. Well, that was new. In all my years of being the reliable, overlooked, taken for granted son, I'd never managed to make Mom cry. But apparently, facing the consequences of treating me like garbage was emotionally challenging for her. Dad's voicemails were the most interesting because Dad doesn't usually do emotional expression beyond mild disappointment and occasional pride in Ryan's latest failure. But desperation had apparently unlocked a whole new range of paternal communication. Son, I don't know what's going on, but your mother is beside herself. People are calling asking about some kind of family drama, and Ryan's party is falling apart. I know we haven't always. Look, can you just call us back? Please. Please. When was the last time my father had said please to me about anything? But the real masterpiece came in voicemail 43, when Julia finally dropped all pretense and revealed exactly what this was really about. You want to destroy our family because you're upset about a birthday party? A birthday party? You're willing to humiliate us in front of everyone we know because we missed one dinner? This is insane. This is cruel. And this isn't the man I married. The man I married was better than this. He was mature enough to handle disappointment without burning everything down out of spite. The man she married. The reliable fixer, the understanding doormat. The guy who would swallow his hurt feelings and show up anyway when they needed something. The man who would prioritize their comfort over his own dignity. Who would smile and pretend everything was fine while they treated him like he didn't matter. She was right. The man she married would never have done this. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who understood his own worth and wasn't afraid to defend it. I finished my second beer, closed my laptop, and walked into my kitchen to cut myself a piece of leftover birthday cake. Yes, I still had some in the freezer from last year, because apparently I'm sentimental about my own disasters. As I sat at my kitchen table, eating cake that was exactly 1 year old, my phone buzzed one more time. Call number 52. Julia again. I looked at that familiar photo. That smiling face that had once represented love and partnership and shared dreams, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even satisfaction. Just a kind of peaceful emptiness, like the quiet after a storm has passed and washed everything clean. I turned off the phone and set it aside. Outside my window, the sun was setting on what should have been Ryan's epic family gathering. The party that was supposed to prove he could bring everyone together. The celebration that had cost him thousands of dollars and months of planning. Instead, it was just another Saturday evening, quiet and mine. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't the forgotten one, the overlooked son, the reliable husband who could be counted on to fix everyone else's problems while his own needs went unmet. I wasn't the foundation everyone else built their lives on while taking me completely for granted. I was the man who had walked away, the man who had chosen his own dignity over their convenience. The man who had smiled while they choked on the consequences of their own choices. And that smile, it wasn't for them anymore. It was mine. It started with a dull cramp just under my ribs. I figured it was gas, maybe the leftover tacos from the night before coming back to haunt me. But within an hour, I was doubled over in my office, sweating through my dress shirt, gripping the edge of my desk like it was the only thing keeping me upright. My assistant, Denise, took one look at me, eyes wide and scared, and called 911 before I could protest. The paramedics arrived just as I sank to the floor, curled around the pain that now stabbed like a blade with every breath. The back of the ambulance was cold, sterile, bright. They asked me questions I could barely answer through clenched teeth. My vitals weren't good, a heart rate up, blood pressure crashing. One of them muttered something about a ruptured appendix. "We need to get him into surgery fast," I heard someone say. That's when I reached for my phone. Through the haze, I dialed Talia, my wife, my partner, my person. She picked up on the third ring, the noise in the background immediately giving away her location, glasses clinking, laughter, a familiar song from one of her wedding playlists. "Hello," she said, her voice light, almost annoyed. "Talia," I managed. "I'm in an ambulance. They think it's my appendix. I'm on the way to surgery." There was a pause, not a gasp. Not a scramble to ask which hospital. Just a pause. Then she said, "I'm at Cassie's wedding." Another pause, then a sigh. "Can we talk later?" I waited, thinking maybe I'd misheard her. That she'd follow it with a frantic, "Where are you?" "I'm coming now." But there was nothing. Just the soft hum of her breathing and the echo of a party on the other end of the line. Then a click. The call ended. I looked at the phone like it might explain what had just happened. Like maybe I'd called the wrong number, or maybe she hadn't heard me right. But no, she hung up. She hung up. I was wheeled into the ER, my phone slipping from my fingers. A nurse took it, tucked it into a plastic bag with my wallet and keys. "We're going to take good care of you," she said. Her kindness felt like a warm towel over my chest. Not because it was extraordinary, just because it wasn't indifference. The pain got worse, like someone was twisting me from the inside. They gave me something in and for that blurred the edges of everything. A surgeon came by, explained the risks, said they had to go in immediately. You'll be under before you know it. I asked if I could see my wife. They shook their heads gently. No one's here yet. I nodded. Not because I accepted it, but because I couldn't argue. I was too tired, too drugged, too hollowed out by the growing realization that she wasn't coming. The last thing I saw before the lights dimmed was the nurse squeezing my hand and telling me to count backwards from 10. I tried, made it to 7, maybe 6. And when I woke up, alone in the recovery room, it wasn't the pain in my side that tore at me the most, it was the silence. The absence of footsteps rushing in. No soft voice saying my name. No fingers brushing the hair from my forehead. Just the beep of a heart monitor, and the sterile ceiling tiles that looked exactly the same as they had when I went under. A nurse came in, smiled warmly. Surgery went well. We got it in time. You're very lucky. I nodded again. I was alive. Apparently that counted for something. Anyone coming to visit? She asked gently. My daughter, maybe, I said. She's only 7. The word stuck in my throat. I couldn't say wife. Not right then. Not yet. They moved me to a regular room. I stared at the door every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, expecting her to appear. Expecting anything. Even a text. But my phone stayed dark. And when I finally asked to see it, there was only one new message from my neighbor Clarice. Bria's with me. Heard what happened. I'll bring her after school. Hang in there. I lay back on the stiff hospital bed, one hand pressed against the bandage on my side, the other gripping the phone like it was a lifeline. But the only one reaching for me was a child. My child. The one with tiny hands and a bigger heart than either of her parents deserved. The morphine dulled the ache in my gut, but nothing could numb the sting in my chest. I kept replaying the moment in the ambulance. Her voice, so breezy, so detached. Like I'd interrupted a grocery list. Like I wasn't lying in the back of a speeding emergency vehicle, minutes away from being sliced open. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't even ask which hospital. And maybe that told me everything I hadn't wanted to admit for months now. Maybe the surgery hadn't just removed a failing organ. It had revealed a failing marriage. One that had been rupturing long before my appendix did. The truth hit hard. I could have died, and she wouldn't have known until the music stopped and the lights came back on at that damn wedding. And worst of all, I believed her when she said, "Can we talk later?" Because somewhere deep inside, I was still holding space for a woman who had already let go of me. But not Bria. Bria was coming. And somehow, that was enough to keep breathing. The room was gray, and not just in color. It was the kind of gray that soaked into your skin, numbed your thoughts, and blurred the sense of time. The post-op haze clung to me like a damp towel. Somewhere nearby, monitors beeped steadily, rhythmic and different. My throat burned from the breathing tube they'd used during surgery, and every inch of my body felt foreign, like it had been taken apart and sewn back together. I blinked slowly, piecing the world together one sterile surface at a time. Then I felt it, small fingers wrapped around my hand. I turned my head, sluggish and heavy, and saw her. Bria, my daughter. 7 years old and already so much more than I deserved. She sat perched on the edge of the hospital bed like she belonged there. Her legs swung gently, brushing against the railing with each motion. Her dark curls were pulled into a messy ponytail, and she wore her favorite rainbow hoodie, the one with the unicorn patch peeling off at the corner. She didn't say anything at first, just held my hand like she'd been doing it the entire time. "Hi, Daddy," she said softly. The sound of her voice hit me harder than the anesthesia ever could. "Bria," I whispered, my throat hoarse. "You're here." She nodded. "Clarice picked me up from school. She said you got hurt." Clarice. My neighbor. The woman who had always offered to help with Bria whenever Talia got too busy. I owed her 100 thank yous. 1,000. Because when I was laid out, sliced open and sedated, it wasn't my wife who showed up. It was my daughter. Delivered by someone who actually gave a damn. "I'm okay," I lied, squeezing Bria's hand weakly. "Just a little sore." She looked at me like she didn't believe a word of it, but she didn't challenge me. "Not yet. I brought Henry," she said, lifting her small backpack onto the bed. She reached inside and pulled out a faded green stuffed turtle, his seams loose, one eye missing. "He keeps secrets," she added, placing Henry gently beside my arm. I chuckled despite the pain that shot through my abdomen. "Thanks, sweetheart. I think I could use a few secrets." Bria swung her legs a bit faster, her eyes studying me with a mix of curiosity and worry that no 7-year-old should ever have to carry. She leaned in close, lowering her voice like we were the only two people in the world. Why didn't Mommy come? The question hit harder than the scalpel had. I hesitated. What do you say to a child when the truth would bruise something tender inside her? When the person she trusted most had chosen glitter and champagne over a hospital gurney? She was at a wedding, I said slowly, measuring every syllable. I think she didn't realize how serious it was. Bria didn't nod, didn't blink. She just stared at me with those wide eyes that had always felt like little mirrors. Then, in a tone that was oddly calm for someone her age, she said, "That's not okay." I didn't know what to say to that. I wanted to defend Talia, to make excuses, but I couldn't find any that made sense, not to her, not to me. Bria reached out and placed her hand over mine again. "I'll stay," she whispered. And she did. For hours, she stayed perched beside me, humming to herself, coloring in her notebook, occasionally checking my monitor as if the beeping meant something she could fix. The nurses adored her. One brought her an extra pudding cup. Another let her borrow a stethoscope. Clarice eventually returned with snacks and a warm blanket for Bria, and I could see the worry etched into her face when she looked at me. "She's strong," Clarice whispered when Bria stepped out to use the restroom. "She wouldn't leave you if you asked her to." I nodded slowly. "I know." As the afternoon faded into evening, I drifted in and out of sleep, lulled by morphine and Bria's soft, constant presence. She didn't cry. Not once. She just existed beside me like an anchor. When the world felt unsteady, she kept it from tilting too far. At one point, I woke to find her asleep at the foot of the bed, Henry tucked under her chin, her notebook clutched to her chest. I reached for it gently, flipping through the pages. There were drawings, bright, bold strokes of color. One of the pictures was of a hospital bed, a little girl sitting beside it, holding the hand of a man with a tube in his side. Underneath it, she'd written, "This is how I helped." I closed the notebook slowly, a lump forming in my throat. She had helped, more than she would ever understand. The door opened quietly a little while later. A nurse stepped in, checked my vitals, and smiled down at Bria. "She's been amazing," she whispered. "Most kids get scared in hospitals. She's been like a little guardian." I nodded again, words still caught in my throat. That night, after Clarice convinced Bria to go home and get some rest, the room felt cavernous without her. The silence was louder, emptier. Talia still hadn't called, still hadn't texted. I was alone again in every sense that mattered. I stared at the ceiling, fingers twitching where Bria had held them for so long. The painkillers dulled the physical ache, but the emotional one simmered just beneath the surface, like embers waiting to ignite. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but something about the way Bria had sat beside me, unflinching and faithful, made me hold it together just a little longer. Because she hadn't fallen apart, and if my daughter could sit in this cold, sterile room without breaking, so could I. Before I fell asleep, I whispered into the quiet, hoping the walls would keep the secret too. "Thank you, Bria. Thank you for showing up." She was just 7, but in that moment, she was everything. I woke to the sound of stilettos tapping down the hall. There was a rhythm to it, too deliberate to be a nurse. The door creaked open, and in walked Talia, still dressed like the party hadn't ended. Her curls were intact, cascading down her shoulders in ringlets too perfect for morning. Makeup clung to her face, lipstick slightly faded but visible, foundation layered like armor. She wore the lavender dress I'd seen hanging in our closet for weeks, the one she said she wasn't even sure she wanted to wear. Apparently, she did. "Hey," she said softly, walking toward the bed like it was unfamiliar territory. "You look better than I thought." I blinked up at her, too drained to measure the weight of her words. My throat was dry, and the ache in my side pulsed with each breath. I tried to sit up straighter, wincing at the pain. "No, don't," she said, reaching out halfway like she might help, then stopping short. Her hand hovered for a second, then fell to her side. "Sorry I couldn't be here last night. Cassie's wedding ran long. Long. That was how she described it. As if time was the only reason she didn't show. Not choice. Not detachment. Just a schedule that got away from her." I looked at her and saw a stranger wrapped in silk and sprayed in rose perfume. A woman who kissed my cheek with lips that didn't linger, like her presence alone was the gift. She pulled back quickly, brushing non-existent lint from her purse. "How are you feeling?" she asked, not meeting my eyes. "I had a drain tube in me last night," I said flatly. "Still do." She nodded like I'd told her the weather. "Well, I'm here now. She glanced around the room, mildly annoyed by the clutter of used tissues, empty water cups, and the faint antiseptic scent that clung to everything. Room's kind of depressing, she added. It was a hospital. It wasn't meant to be a honeymoon suite. I didn't respond. I just watched her as she finally sat down, crossing her legs at the knee, her dress riding up slightly but never losing its poise. Her phone chimed. She smiled as she pulled it from her purse. Cassie and Trey landed in Cabo, she said, scrolling. Oh, actually, they ran into an issue at the resort. Had to upgrade last minute. $2,000 more than expected. Can you believe that? I stared at her, blinking slowly. She looked up, as if my silence was an invitation. I know we already gave them the espresso machine, but do you think we could help? Just to get them settled, you know? I didn't even realize I was gripping the bed rail until my knuckles turned white. $2,000, I repeated, the words flat and hollow. You're asking me to pay for someone else's honeymoon, from a hospital bed. She tilted her head slightly, like she was confused why I would find this offensive. It's not a big deal. You've helped them before. And it's not like we're strapped. Talia, I was in emergency surgery last night. Alone. No one came. Not you. Not anyone. I could have died on that table, and the first time you'd know would have been if they called you after. She didn't flinch. She just pressed her lips together and looked away for a second. You always do this, she said, her voice laced with a defensive edge. Make everything about how I disappoint you. I was at a wedding. I didn't know it was that serious. You didn't ask. That stopped her. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was. She looked at her phone again, more to avoid my eyes than to check anything urgent. A long pause stretched between us, the kind of silence that grew heavier the longer it sat. Then, without shame, she said, well, can we talk about Cassie's thing later? They're stressed, and I don't want to leave them hanging. I let out a laugh that wasn't really a laugh. It was breath and disbelief. I haven't eaten solid food. I have stitches in my side. And you want me to wire money to Cabo? It's not about the money, she snapped. It's about being there for people you love. There it was. The line she didn't realize should have shattered her argument instead of strengthening it. I stared at her, long and hard. I was here last night, Talia. Cut open, bleeding, drugged out of my mind. And you didn't come. So maybe don't lecture me on being there for the people you love. The words landed. I saw them hit her. Saw the slight twitch of her mouth. The narrowing of her eyes. But she didn't apologize. She didn't even look ashamed. Just inconvenienced. She stood up abruptly, smoothing out the front of her dress. I'll come back later. Maybe bring you some real food if they let you eat. And then she walked out. Just like that. Like it was any other visit. Like she hadn't just confirmed every quiet suspicion I'd been trying to suppress for the past year. I stared at the closed door for a long time, the beeping of the monitor returning as the only sound in the room. It wasn't the pain in my body that had hollowed me out. It was the truth echoing in her footsteps as she walked away. She was gone before Bria arrived again, this time with a coloring book and a chocolate milk. She climbed into the chair next to me, giving Henry the turtle a quick pat on the head before settling in. Mommy said she had to help Cassie, she murmured, like she already knew it wouldn't sit well with me. I nodded slowly. That's what she said. Bria looked at me for a long time. Then she reached into her backpack, pulling out her drawing notebook. She flipped to a blank page and began to write. What are you doing? I asked. She didn't look up. I'm writing Mom a letter. I didn't ask what it would say. I was too tired, too raw. And somewhere deep inside, I knew Bria would say everything I couldn't. The only thing I could do was reach for her hand and hold it, tight. Because the only person who showed up without being asked was a little girl with a turtle and a voice bigger than the both of us. And right then, that was more than enough. The hours slipped past like syrup, slow, sticky, and impossible to ignore. I stayed mostly quiet that day, half awake and sore, the kind of sore that wasn't just from surgery, but from something deeper, more permanent. My body was trying to heal, but my mind had already decided what it wouldn't forget. Talia sat in the corner of the hospital room, not beside me, not near the bed, but tucked into the vinyl armchair like a bored guest at someone else's event. Her legs were crossed, her phone cradled in both hands, her thumbs dancing across the screen. She hadn't asked how I slept. She hadn't asked if I needed anything. She hadn't even looked at the drain bag hanging from my side, half full of something that looked like watered-down cranberry juice. Instead, she was smiling at photos. Look at this one, she said out loud to herself. Cassie's dress in that light, gorgeous. She turned the phone toward me briefly, but I didn't react, didn't lift my head, didn't offer a sound. The disconnect between her joy and my reality was so vast, it wasn't even worth naming anymore. Bria sat by my side again, her presence a balm. She brought her sketchbook, the thick, spiral-bound one she insisted on carrying everywhere. Crayon bits were smudged along the cover, and the corners were dog-eared from love, not neglect. She wasn't coloring today, though. She was quiet, observant, watching the space around her like she was trying to figure out where she fit in the strange adult world of beeping machines, distant parents, and whispered tension. "Daddy," she said softly, nudging my arm. "Can I see your chart?" I looked down at her, confused. "Why?" She shrugged like the question didn't really need an answer. "I just want to know what happened." I didn't ask further. I didn't need to. Bria had always been a little different, intuitive, thoughtful beyond her age. The kind of child who could sense mood changes before the temperature in the room shifted. I motioned to the clipboard resting in the wall bracket. "You can take it. Just be careful." She climbed off the chair, her little sneakers padding softly on the tile. Talia didn't even look up from her phone as Bria retrieved the discharge note tucked behind the daily chart. She studied it like it was a treasure map, her brow furrowed. Then, wordlessly, she slipped it into the back pocket of her sketchbook and zipped it shut. "What are you planning?" I asked, more amused than alarmed. She glanced at me with a small smile. "I'm not sure yet, but I think Mom needs to read it." I should have stopped her. I should have said something. But I didn't, because for the first time in 2 days, I felt seen, felt like someone in that room understood what had happened to me. It wasn't just my appendix that ruptured. Something else did too. Something between me and the woman scrolling through Santorini spa packages 5 feet A. Later that night, the room quieted. The nurses made their rounds. The lights dimmed to a gentle yellow that buzzed softly in the corners. Talia was still in the chair, her eyes now scanning Instagram reels, laughing quietly to herself every now and then. I wasn't sure what hurt more, her distance or her ease. Bria sat cross-legged on the floor with her sketchbook open again. But she wasn't drawing. She was writing. Her glitter pen moved slowly, deliberately. The tip scraped softly against the thick paper, her tongue poking out between her lips in concentration. She flipped back and forth a few times, then settled on a clean page. I watched, curious but too tired to ask. When she finished, she carefully folded the page in half, then again, and tucked the paper, along with the discharge note, into a blank white envelope she'd pulled from her backpack. "Where did you get that?" I asked. "Clarice," she said. "I told her I wanted to write a letter." I nodded slowly, swallowing past the dry lump in my throat. "Did you write it for me?" She shook her head. "For Mom." That answer landed like a stone skipping across still water. I didn't know what Bria had written, and I didn't ask. Some part of me trusted her to say what I couldn't, what I'd long stopped trying to. She closed the envelope carefully and looked at me, her eyes clear. "Can I leave it on her pillow when we get home?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes," I said. "She needs to know." Bria crawled up into the chair beside me and leaned her head on my shoulder. I winced slightly at the pressure, but didn't move. I couldn't. I didn't want to. "Do you think she'll be mad?" she asked after a while. I looked across the room at Talia, still glued to her screen, still lost in a world I no longer lived in, and then down at the envelope in Bria's lap. "She might be," I said honestly. "But sometimes people need to hear the truth, even when it's uncomfortable." Bria nodded slowly, as if she already knew that, as if she'd known it far longer than a 7-year-old should. The nurse came in a bit later, checking my 4 and updating the chart. Bria yawned and rested her head against the side of the bed. I reached over and brushed a curl from her forehead. "Go to sleep, baby," I whispered. She nodded, clutching Henry the turtle to her chest. Across the room, Talia looked up just once. She saw us, me and Bria, huddled in silence, and for a brief second, her face twisted into something unreadable. But she didn't say anything. She didn't ask about the envelope Bria now held under her palm. She just returned to her scrolling, pausing only to like a photo of Cassie and Trey toasting in the glow of a candlelit dinner. That night, the monitors kept beeping. My side throbbed. But none of it hurt as much as knowing the most important moment of the day didn't even register for my wife. My daughter wrote a letter. And I hoped it would be loud enough to be heard over 1,000 missed moments. We returned home 3 days later, though the word home no longer felt accurate. It was just a structure now, walls and beams and hollow spaces where intimacy used to live. I walked slower than usual, hunched forward like a question mark, my body still learning how to move without screaming. The incision in my side burned with each step, every breath stretching the line of stitches, but I said nothing. What was the point? Talia barely spoke during the drive. Her fingers tapped constantly against her phone screen, the soft clicks syncing with the car's turn signals like a metronome for her apathy. She didn't ask if I was hungry, didn't ask if I needed help into the house. When we pulled into the driveway, she simply got out, heels clacking against the pavement as she carried her purse and went inside ahead of me. Bria stayed close, one hand on my elbow, her tiny frame acting like a pillar I shouldn't have needed but did. Inside, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and silence. Talia had arranged for a cleaner to freshen up the place before we came home. She said it was so I wouldn't have to worry about mess when I returned. But it didn't feel like a gesture of care. It felt like staging. Like the house had been prepped for appearances, not recovery. I sank slowly into the couch, biting my lip against the ache as I eased down. Bria ran to get my blanket, the one with the navy and gold checkers she always insisted made me look like a superhero. She draped it over my legs, and then scampered off to the kitchen without a word. The sound of drawers opening and the soft scrape of a chair being dragged caught my attention. I turned my head slowly and saw her at the kitchen table, glitter pen in hand, notebook open again. She sat with a quiet focus, her tongue tucked at the corner of her mouth, just like she did when she was trying to get her unicorn drawing symmetrical. She was writing again. This wasn't the playful kind of writing. No hearts, no stars, no doodles in the margins. Just neat lines and her small hand pressing firmly, like every word had to land with the right amount of weight. She folded the paper, opened a fresh envelope, and slid the note inside. Then she reached into her sketchbook and took out the hospital discharge summary she'd tucked away days earlier. She placed it gently in the envelope behind the letter and sealed it shut. She stared at the envelope for a moment, then stood and walked down the hallway with quiet purpose. I watched her pass, watched her pause just outside our bedroom. She looked back at me once, not for permission, but for reassurance. I gave her a small nod, the only strength I could manage. She turned the doorknob slowly, tiptoed inside, and a few seconds later, she re-emerged empty-handed. Talia came downstairs a moment later, dressed for work. She was already wearing heels, makeup fresh again, phone tucked in her palm like a lifeline. "I've got meetings this morning," she said, not looking at me. "Did you take your meds yet?" "I did," I replied. My voice cracked a little. I hadn't spoken much since we got home. Maybe I didn't trust it to carry all I was holding in. She glanced at me, her eyes skimming the blanket, the way I was sitting slightly lopsided, the swelling around my waist. But she didn't ask how I felt. Not really. Her eyes flicked toward Bria, who was now sitting on the floor with her turtle Henry, brushing its plush head with the care of a child nursing something hurt and precious. Talia walked into the kitchen, heels clicking against the hardwood. "We're low on almond milk," she said, as if that were somehow more urgent than the incision tearing through my side. Then she added, "Remind me to grab a gift for Trey's mom. Her birthday's next week." I didn't reply. I wasn't being petty. I just didn't have the emotional energy to stretch towards someone who never once stepped toward me. 10 minutes later, the front door shut behind her. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was proof. Proof that everything I'd felt in that hospital room was not imagined. The distance was real. And now that I was home, I could see it even more clearly. Our lives weren't intertwined anymore. They were simply overlapping out of habit. Bria climbed into the chair beside me and rested her head on my shoulder. "She'll find it," she whispered. "She will," I replied, resting my hand on top of hers. "She'll probably be mad," she added, looking up at me. "Maybe. Will she say anything?" "I don't know." That was the truth. I had no idea what Talia would do with the envelope, whether she'd read it at all, whether she'd care. But I did know one thing: someone had to say something. And Bria had done it. At 7 years old, she'd had the courage neither of us did. Later that evening, I heard footsteps upstairs. Then stillness. Long, thick stillness. I imagined her walking into the room, seeing the envelope on her pillow. I imagined her picking it up, maybe recognizing the handwriting, maybe thinking it was a drawing or a note from Bria asking for another trip to the zoo. I wondered what her face looked like when she realized it was something else, something heavier. I didn't go upstairs. I stayed on the couch while the television murmured on low volume. Bria sat beside me, curled up under my arm with Henry squeezed tight against her chest. She didn't ask to watch cartoons. She didn't ask for snacks. She just stayed close. Like I was the patient and she was the caretaker. And maybe that was true. When Talia finally came down, her steps were slower than usual. Her hands were empty. No phone. No purse. She didn't say anything. Just walked past us, paused in the doorway to the kitchen, then turned and went right back upstairs. I didn't follow her. Bria lifted her head. Do you think she read it? I think she did. She didn't say anything. She doesn't know how to, I said softly. Bria nodded like she understood something deep and painful and adult. She has to feel it first. And maybe that was the most profound thing I'd heard in weeks. The envelope had been delivered. Now we waited to see if the words inside could do what silence never could. I didn't hear her open the envelope, but I knew the exact moment she found it. The house had fallen into its quiet nighttime rhythm, dishwasher humming low in the kitchen, the distant creak of wood settling into the walls. Bria had already gone to bed, tucked in with Henry under one arm and the corner of her blanket curled in the other. I was in the guest room, not because anyone said I had to be, but because the idea of sleeping beside Talia after everything felt like inviting a stranger into my grief. I lay there in the dim light, staring up at the ceiling, trying not to think too hard, trying not to imagine the crumple of paper or the sharp inhale she might have made when she recognized her daughter's handwriting. But then I heard it, the soft tread of her footsteps down the hall. They stopped just outside our bedroom door. The floorboards groaned, then silence. A long silence. And then a sigh, like something cracked inside her chest. I didn't move. She didn't either. Eventually, the door creaked open and then gently closed. Another few seconds passed before I heard the mattress creak and settle under her weight. Then stillness again. I could picture her. Sitting on the edge of the bed in that pale light, envelope in hand, the doctor's discharge note folded inside with Bria's words scrawled in glitter pen, tiny, unfiltered, and devastating. I'd never read the letter. Still hadn't asked. But I didn't need to. Bria had seen everything. Heard enough. Felt too much. And in her own way, she'd become the witness I didn't know I needed. I sat up slowly, the incision pulling like a stitch caught on fabric. I shuffled to the hallway, leaning against the door frame to catch my breath. The house was dark, but from under the crack in our bedroom door, I saw a line of light, still and faint. Then it happened. The sound of paper rustling, a breath catching in a throat. And then, barely audible, the faintest shiver in the air. I could hear it because I wasn't just listening with my ears. I was listening with everything in me. I knew that sound. Her hands were shaking. For the first time in what felt like forever, the silence wasn't mine, it was hers. The weight of that reversal was nearly enough to drop me to the floor. I didn't knock. I didn't speak. I backed away from the door, back into the guest room, and sat on the edge of the bed, stunned by the reality of it. She was finally seeing it. Not just the paper. Not just Bria's words. She was seeing me. All those nights she rolled away instead of asking how work was. All those dinners where I carried the conversation like luggage only I packed. All the birthdays, anniversaries, long silences dressed up as peace. The overlooked efforts. The forgotten kindnesses. The apologies I'd never been owed, but gave anyway. Now, in that room, with Bria's tiny handwriting spelling out everything I'd left unspoken, Talia was facing the one thing she couldn't ignore, reflection. Not accusation. Not revenge. Reflection. An hour passed before I heard her move again. She padded into the hallway barefoot, more slowly than usual. Her pace was tentative, hesitant. She paused outside the guest room, and I held my breath, unsure if she'd knock or keep walking. The door creaked slightly, and then she pushed it open with a hand that still trembled. Her face was pale, washed out under the hallway light. Her eyes looked softer, but guarded, too. She didn't say my name. Just stood there, the envelope in one hand, the folded note in the other. I read it, she said, her voice small. I nodded. She stepped in slowly, as if the room might collapse beneath her. She wrote it herself. You didn't tell her to, right? No, I said. She looked down at the paper again, her eyes welling, not spilling, but holding something at the edge. She said she saw me smiling at pictures while you were in pain, Talia murmured. She said she was scared, not just for you, but for what it meant that I didn't care. I didn't answer. Not because I couldn't, but because she needed space to say what she hadn't been able to. She said I didn't come when it mattered, she whispered. You didn't. The words hung there like smoke. Heavy, honest. Talia sank down into the chair in the corner, the one where she'd scrolled through wedding photos in the hospital room without so much as a glance at my face. Her fingers gripped the edge of the chair. I didn't think it was that serious, she said again, repeating the excuse like it might sound better the second time. You've always been strong. You always bounce back. I thought. You thought I could do it alone, I finished for her. And I did. But that wasn't the point. She pressed her lips together, then opened them again only to close them once more. Why didn't you say anything? She asked. Why didn't you scream or demand I come? Because I didn't want to ask to matter, I said quietly. I wanted to see if I did. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was aching. It was the sound of bricks falling out of a wall she didn't realize she'd built. She looked at me, eyes rimmed with red. I'm sorry. I believed that she wanted to mean it. I even believed she meant it in the moment. But I'd learned that apologies weren't always repair. Sometimes they were just punctuation at the end of a long sentence no one had the courage to edit. I nodded, accepting what I could, leaving the rest untouched. She reached into her pocket and pulled out Bria's stuffed turtle. Henry. She left him on my pillow too, she said. Said he keeps secrets. He does, I said. But Bria? She doesn't. Talia managed a weak smile. No, she doesn't. For a long while, neither of us moved. We didn't rehash the hospital, or the wedding, or the way silence had replaced intimacy over time. We just sat in the gravity of a letter written in glitter ink that had said more than a marriage full of dinner conversations ever had. Eventually, Talia stood and walked back toward the door. She turned before she left, one hand resting on the frame. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted. I nodded slowly. I don't either. But in that moment, I knew something had shifted. Not healed, not reversed. Just shifted. Because her hands had shaken. And that meant, for once, she'd felt it. The next morning arrived with the smell of burnt toast and scrambled silence. The house was unusually still, as if it too had read Bria's letter and didn't know how to respond. I lay in bed listening to the muffled sounds of movement. Talia in the kitchen, fumbling with pans like she wasn't sure what to do with her hands now that they weren't holding her phone. I rose slowly, my body stiff and sore, the incision pulling with each breath. I didn't call out or announce myself. I just moved down the hallway like a ghost revisiting a life he used to live. The kitchen was awash in morning light, too bright for the kind of quiet that filled it. Talia stood over the stove, her robe cinched too tightly, hair pulled back into a bun she used when she didn't want to be seen. She turned when she heard me, but didn't smile. Scrambled eggs, she said softly. And toast. I forgot the timer on the first batch. I looked at the pan. The eggs were too dry, the toast still smoking on a plate by the sink. She wasn't here to impress anyone. This wasn't a grand gesture. It was something else, an apology without a name. I nodded, taking a seat at the table. Bria sat across from me, dressed and ready for school, even though we hadn't yet spoken a word about it. Her backpack rested beside her chair, and her shoes were on the wrong feet, something she often did when she was too deep in her thoughts to notice. Talia set a plate in front of me. No garnish. No effort to dress it up. Just food, mechanical and sufficient. How did you sleep? She asked, still standing. I took a bite of toast and chewed slowly before answering. Fine. She nodded, then moved to the counter and began wiping down a perfectly clean surface. I was thinking of taking Bria to school today. You could rest. Bria looked at me for permission, like I was still the compass she trusted even when the maps got confusing. That's fine, I said. Talia glanced over. I mean, unless you'd rather I didn't. I didn't answer right away. You should take her. Bria stood slowly, slinging her bag over one shoulder. She walked around the table and pressed a kiss to my temple. Text me later, she whispered. Always, I replied. She didn't kiss her mother. Just walked to the front door and waited. Talia followed a moment later, pausing with her hand on the knob. She looked back at me like she wanted to say something, like the apology was still somewhere between her throat and her lips. But it didn't come. Not yet. When the door shut behind them, the silence left behind was heavier than their presence had been. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the uneaten eggs, the half-burnt toast, and the empty space where words should have been. Around noon, my phone buzzed. I picked it up expecting a message from Bria, maybe a doodle or a thinking of you note in emoji form. But it wasn't her. It was an email from Talia's cousin, Cassie. Subject, thank you so much. Hey, just wanted to say thanks again for the honeymoon contribution, Trey, and I were so surprised. We landed in Cabo and upgraded our suite because of you two. You didn't have to, but we're so grateful. Can't wait to show you photos when we get back. The breath I took in was sharp. Cold. There had been no gift. I hadn't authorized anything. I hadn't agreed to send money. Not after what had happened. Not after what she asked for in the hospital, as I lay there with tubes in my side and silence in my ears. I stared at the email for a long time, the words blurring into noise. Then I checked our account. There it was. A $2,000 transfer. Dated the same night I'd returned home. The weight of it sank low in my chest. This wasn't just selfishness. This was an oversight. This was theft of trust, of choice, of the very dignity I'd been trying to rebuild. I set the phone down carefully, like it was something fragile I didn't want to break even though it had just broken me again. Later that afternoon, Talia returned. She stepped inside with her work bag slung over her shoulder and the car keys still in hand. She looked surprised to see me still at the table, like she thought the day would erase the inn. "How was your day?" she asked. "Cassie emailed," I said. She froze mid-step. She thanked us for the honeymoon contribution, I added. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "I didn't agree to that," I said quietly. "I know," she replied. "No excuses this time. Just the truth in its raw, unadorned form." "I didn't say yes, Talia." "I know," she whispered again, barely audible. "Then why?" She hesitated. "Because they asked. Because I didn't want to say no. Because it felt easier to ask for forgiveness than permission." "You didn't even ask for forgiveness." She finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed again, but this time there were no tears waiting behind them, just exhaustion. "I don't know how to fix what I've done." I nodded. "You don't. But that doesn't mean I'll keep pretending it's not broken." She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. So I stood, every movement deliberate, and walked past her toward the guest room. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I just closed it. That night, I lay in bed with my back to the door, staring at the wall until sleep finally came. And in that stillness, I realized something simple but final. There were no apologies. Not real ones. Only a hollow routine dressed up as love. And I'd finally stopped listening for sorry. A week passed like fog, clinging to everything, softening the edges, but not enough to hide the bruises underneath. I moved slower, not just because of the pain in my side, but because I was still dragging the weight of things unspoken. Talia and I exchanged words, sure, but they were functional, past the salt, is Bria dressed, the car needs gas kinds of words. None of them filled the silence between us. They just camouflaged it. Then came the brunch invite. Talia's Aunt Lydia was hosting one of her infamous family gatherings, complete with champagne flutes, matching linen napkins, and surface-level smiles. Talia said we should go. "Everyone will be there," she'd insisted, her tone teetering on obligation and desperation. "It'll be good to show up." "Show up for who?" I asked. She didn't answer. I didn't want to go. The idea of sitting through stories of wedding cakes and honeymoon packages made my chest tighten, but Bria heard us talking. She looked up from her cereal with a quiet kind of hope. "Will Grandma be there?" she asked. "And Aunt Lydia's dog?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, baby. They'll be there." "Then can we go?" "Just for a little," she asked, her eyes shining the way they used to when she believed the world was fair and kind. So I said yes. Not for Talia. For Bria. We arrived to a house filled with curated warmth, scented candles, pristine white furniture, and soft jazz humming through invisible speakers. People greeted us at the door with their kisses and tilted glances. Talia's hand brushed mine once in the driveway, like she was testing if I'd be the husband she could parade again. I kept my hands in my pockets. Inside, Lydia welcomed us with the performative joy of a talk show host. "Darling, you're glowing." "Oh, and look at you," she added to me, her voice dipping into polite surprise. "You made it." "I'm not dead," I replied, maybe a little too flat. She blinked, then chuckled, brushing it off with a pat on my arm. "You always were the dry one." Bria darted toward the backyard, chasing after the corgi with her usual giggle, the sound of it briefly restoring some brightness to the day. We moved to the dining room, where the table was already set, placed cards, polished silverware, miniature name tags tied with ribbon. Talia sat near the center, next to Cassie and her new husband Trey, who looked like he still hadn't unpacked from Cabo. I was placed at the far end, between Lydia's husband and a cousin I hadn't seen in years, someone who once asked me what my name was at our wedding. I eased into the chair carefully, the incision under my shirt reminding me of the wound I still carried. I glanced around the table as the brunch began. Platters passed hands. Stories were swapped. No one mentioned the hospital. No one asked how I was doing. Not a single person looked me in the eye for longer than a second. Cassie beamed as she told the table about the honeymoon. It was magical. The room upgrade was perfect. The champagne, the view. Trey surprised me with a spa day. I felt like a queen. Talia clapped lightly, her voice sweet. You deserved it, Cass. You two worked so hard to make that wedding amazing. I watched the words float between them like currency, exchanged easily, carelessly. And we never got a proper chance to say thank you. Cassie added, turning toward me. That money saved us. You're such a generous guy. I looked at her for a long second, then took a sip of water instead of answering. Someone brought up real estate. Someone else mentioned a new Pilates studio. Lydia went on about her cruise points and how she'd finally earned enough for a free Mediterranean upgrade. Every sentence felt like a plastered-on laugh track from a show I was never invited to join. Bria came back in, her cheeks flushed from running outside. She sat on the arm of my chair instead of returning to her own. She looked around the table, and I watched her eyes dart from face to face like she was memorizing something important. As the table buzzed with wedding photos and vacation plans, my daughter leaned in and whispered, "No one asked if you're okay." "No," I whispered back. They didn't. Talia glanced down the table once, met my eyes for a fraction of a second, then quickly turned back to the conversation. She was laughing. At Trey's joke, maybe, or pretending to. Bria stayed beside me, picking at a corner of her dress. The room had grown louder, fuller with the laughter of people who didn't know they'd left something bleeding behind them. "Daddy," Bria said softly, her voice barely audible above the clatter of silverware. "Can I say something?" I looked at her. Really looked. Of course. She stood. Right there, at the long table covered in floral centerpieces and mimosa pitchers, she stood. Her chair scraped softly against the floor as every adult head turned toward her. Talia's smile faltered. "Bria," she said, a warning tucked inside her name. But Bria didn't stop. "My dad almost died," she said, her voice clear. Small, but unwavering. He had surgery. Real surgery. And he was alone. Mommy was at the wedding. No one came. A stunned hush fell over the table. I wrote Mommy a letter. She read it. "But none of you said sorry," she added, holding up the folded discharge paper like it was a flag of truth. "You were busy with cake and dresses." Cassie's mouth parted. Lydia blinked. Trey coughed into his napkin. Talia stared at her daughter as if she didn't recognize her. "I just thought you should know," Bria finished. Then she sat back down beside me, tucking Henry, who had been in her pocket, into her lap like a shield. The silence wasn't awkward. It was seismic. It cracked something open that had been sealed too long. I reached for Bria's hand and squeezed it. She didn't look at me, just sat still, proud and calm. Talia tried to recover, raising her glass in some kind of false transition, but it was too late. The mood had shifted. The performance had ended. The truth had taken center stage. That day, we left before dessert. Talia didn't speak on the way home. Bria fell asleep in the back seat, Henry tucked under her chin. And me? I drove in silence, but inside, I was standing. Finally standing. Because my daughter had said the words that had lived inside me for weeks. And there was no taking them back. We didn't talk much the night after the brunch. The silence wasn't cold, it was calcified. Like something ancient had finally cracked wide open, and no one dared touch the shards just yet. Talia barely looked at me as she paced the kitchen, her footsteps softer than usual, as though she didn't want to rattle anything else loose. Bria had gone straight to her room, a quiet trail of glitter from her hair clip marking her path. She didn't say she was tired. She didn't ask for cartoons. She just climbed into bed, pulled the blanket to her chin, and turned her face toward the wall. I stood outside her door for a moment, unsure if I should knock or just let her rest. In the end, I chose to sit on the floor outside, the weight of the day still pressing into my chest. It wasn't just what she'd said, it was the way she'd said it. Steady, clear, not a tantrum, not an outburst. A declaration. She had spoken for me, yes, but she'd also spoken for herself. Because she'd been watching, listening, waiting. The next morning, the house was awkwardly quiet. Talia tiptoed through breakfast, pouring cereal like it was a peace offering. She placed the bowl in front of Bria, who stirred the spoon without eating, eyes fixed on the milk slowly turning beige from the flakes. "I was thinking," Talia said cautiously, "maybe we should have a movie night tonight. Order pizza, just the three of us." Bria didn't respond. I cleared my throat. "Bria?" She looked up at me. "Do we have to pretend again?" Talia froze. Her lips parted slightly. "Pretend what?" Bria's eyes locked on her mother's with the kind of honesty that only comes from children before the world teaches them to dilute truth. That everything's fine. That you didn't forget Daddy in the hospital. That no one at brunch cared. Talia's hand tightened around the cereal box. "That's not fair." "It's not supposed to be," Bria replied. There was no anger in her voice. Just facts. A child's math. And the numbers didn't lie. Talia looked at me then, as if begging for intervention, a bridge, a softened version of the moment. But I didn't step in. I couldn't. Bria slid off the stool and disappeared down the hall again. I waited for the slam of a door, but it never came. "She's a child," Talia said, the edge in her voice growing. "You think that was appropriate? At a family brunch?" "She's a child," I repeated, "who watched her father go into surgery alone and come out to a party you never left. She doesn't understand the full context." "She understands enough," I said. "More than most adults in that room." Talia shook her head and turned her back to me, wiping a perfectly clean counter. "You always take her side." I sighed, my fingers curling into the armrest. "There shouldn't be sides, Talia. That's the problem." She didn't respond, just scrubbed harder, like the silence was something she could wipe away. Later that day, Bria reappeared with her drawing notebook. She sat beside me on the couch and opened to a new page, flipping past sketches of Henry the Turtle and lopsided family portraits. "What are you working on now?" I asked. She looked up, her eyes wide. "I'm writing my speech." I raised a brow. "Speech?" She nodded. "In case I have to say it again." I swallowed hard. "You don't have to do that, sweetheart. You said what needed to be said." "But what if they still don't get it?" she asked, tapping her pen against her notebook. "What if they pretend again?" Her question hit me in a place I'd been avoiding, because pretending was how Talia and I had survived so long. Pretending that distance was routine. That silence meant peace. That forgetting someone in the most vulnerable moment of their life could somehow be brushed over with matching napkins and champagne flutes. They might, I admitted. But that doesn't mean you have to stay quiet. She kept writing. That evening, Talia approached with a stiffness in her spine. She held her phone in one hand and a pair of folded pajamas in the other. "I told Mom we won't be coming next weekend," she said, voice flat. I nodded. I said we needed time as a family. Another nod. She set the phone down and looked at me, her eyes searching. "Do you want to talk?" "I think we've done enough talking," I replied. "Now it's about listening." "To what?" "To Bria. To yourself. To what this house has become." She lowered herself onto the edge of the armchair across from me, the weight of it finally catching up. "I didn't mean to let it get like this." I said nothing. Regret wasn't currency anymore. It couldn't be traded for love. I thought I was doing what I had to keep up appearances, to be the kind of wife, the kind of friend. "You stopped being a partner." The sentence cut through the space between us like a blade. "And you stopped asking me to be one," she added, quietly. I paused, surprised by the truth in her reply. "You gave up on me," she whispered. And I didn't know how to fight for something that didn't want to be held anymore. The room tilted in that moment, not in rage, not in sorrow, in honesty. Finally. But honesty comes late sometimes, and it doesn't always rebuild what's fallen. From down the hall, we heard Bria humming, a soft, tuneless melody that drifted into the silence like a thread trying to stitch something back together. Talia's voice cracked. "Is it too late?" "I don't know," I said. "But if you're asking me that now, it means you finally started to care again." She blinked back the sting in her eyes. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't fix it," I told her. "You show up. And you stop expecting praise for doing the bare minimum." She looked away, ashamed. Bria came back out moments later, clutching her notebook. "Can I read you something?" Talia nodded. I did too. She climbed into my lap, opened to a page, and read slowly, her voice clear. "When someone you love is hurting, you're supposed to sit with them, not scroll through parties, not leave them alone. If you forget someone when they're scared, they won't feel safe around you again, even if you smile later. So I want people to know what hurting sounds like, so they won't do it too. Talia cried then. Not sobbed, not wailed, but cried, quietly. The kind of cry that comes from being seen as the villain in a story you didn't realize was being written. Bria closed the notebook, satisfied, and placed Henry in her mother's lap. He keeps secrets, she said, but you shouldn't. And with that, Bria went back to her room. And Talia finally sat still. Really, really still. The thing about healing is that no one tells you how quiet it is. Not peaceful quiet, just still. The kind of still that follows an explosion. The kind that lets you hear your own breath and realize how long you've been holding it. The morning after Bria read her letter aloud, the house didn't bounce back. It didn't buzz with apologies or hum with reconciliation. It just existed in that gray space between damage and decision. Talia was different, yes, but not changed. She moved more softly, spoke more gently, but the air around her still vibrated with discomfort, with guilt, the kind that wants to be forgiven without truly knowing how to ask. I noticed she'd been wearing her wedding ring again. She'd stopped for a while, probably without realizing. It had sat unused in the dish by the sink for weeks. But now it was back, quietly slipped on, like maybe it could speak for her when she couldn't. She made breakfast that morning, blueberry pancakes, Bria's favorite. She asked me if I wanted coffee. I said no. We didn't talk much. We hadn't since Bria's words turned the house into something resembling a courtroom. After Bria left for school, hugging me twice, telling me I looked almost healed, Talia and I stood in the kitchen alone. She leaned against the counter, arms folded, eyes scanning the room like it was a stranger's home. I've been trying, she said, almost in a whisper. I know. She looked at me then. I don't know if it matters now. I nodded. It does. Just not the way you hoped. She swallowed hard. You're not here anymore, are you? My eyes didn't flinch. I'm in the house, but I haven't been home for a long time. The words didn't come with fire. They weren't meant to wound. They were just the truth. I didn't think it would come to this, she murmured, her voice shaky. Neither did I. She reached into the drawer beside her, pulled out a folded paper, and placed it on the counter between us. It was an apology letter, handwritten. The kind people write when they've been coached on accountability, when they finally understand what harm feels like from the other side. I didn't pick it up. I wrote it, she said, tapping it once. But I think I'm too late. You are, I said, gently. But thank you for writing it anyway. She nodded, her fingers twitching nervously. What now? It wasn't the first time she'd asked that question, but it was the first time she said it without expecting me to carry the answer. I've been looking at places, I said. Nothing far. Just enough to breathe. Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't gasp. I think, somewhere inside, she knew it was coming. Maybe she had known for years and just kept hoping that if we both stayed silent long enough, the story would rewrite itself. For Bria, she asked, voice cracking. For all of us, I said. She needs to see that love isn't supposed to feel like waiting. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. I don't want to lose my family. You lost me the moment I realized you'd rather protect a party than hold my hand in an emergency room, I said. This is just the part where we stop pretending it didn't happen. She reached for the counter, steadying herself like the floor had moved. I never hated you, I added, even when it hurt. I just kept hoping you'd see me again. But you didn't. And Bria did. That's what saved me. She sat down then, in the kitchen chair that still had a tiny sticker Bria had stuck on months ago, a glittery dolphin that had refused to peel off cleanly. She didn't speak again for several minutes. I'll tell her, I said, about what's happening. And I'll do it kindly. I won't poison her against you. Her shoulders slumped in relief. Thank you. She doesn't need to carry our failure, I added. She just needs to see us handle it with care. The words settled in the room like soft dust, landing on everything. That afternoon, I picked Bria up from school. She came running toward me, backpack bouncing, her smile wide and unburdened. I braced for the questions, she always had them. But instead, she slipped her hand into mine and walked quietly to the car. In the driveway, before climbing in, she looked up at me. You're moving out, aren't you? I froze. Who told you? She smiled sadly. No one. I just know. I heard you say you needed to breathe. I crouched to her level, wincing slightly from the healing stitches, and tucked a curl behind her ear. I love you more than anything. That's not changing. I know, she whispered. I'll be close. You'll see me every day. Weekends. After school. We'll have our routines. She nodded slowly. Can I have 2 bedrooms? One here and one there. You can have two homes, I said. And one heart that's always yours. She hugged me so tightly I had to breathe through it. When we got inside, Talia was waiting in the living room. Bria ran to her and hugged her without hesitation. I saw the surprise in Talia's eyes, the way she held her daughter like she was made of glass. I want you both to be happy, Bria said. That night, I began packing a small bag, just the essentials. I wasn't rushing, but I wasn't dragging my feet either. Talia helped in silence. She folded one of my sweatshirts and placed it in the duffel without looking at me. When I reached the door, Bria stopped me. Wait, she said, running to her room. She came back with Henry. He wants to go with you this time. I smiled through the tightness in my chest and took the stuffed turtle, worn and beloved. Thank you, I said. She hugged me again, and this time, I let my tears fall. I didn't hide them. I didn't turn away. Talia stood by the door, arms folded, eyes wet, but no longer filled with panic. Just acceptance. You'll be okay, I said to her. So will she. I hope you find your breath again, she whispered. I already have, I said, stepping out into the quiet. And for the first time in a long, long time, the silence didn't hurt. It healed.